And we should be going live here pretty soon. And take it away.
All right, thanks, Jacob. All right, so today is May 24, 2021. This is the Oregon City Commission, a special work session that we've called for a Monday evening at 6 p.m., or it's just after 6. Jacob, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Here.
And Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
Here. All right, so the first item we have on our agenda, we have 3 items tonight. The first item is a discussion item with a presentation from the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde about the visioning of the Blue Heron property. I will just say to the members of the Grand Ronde, I see a few of you, so I will let you introduce yourselves to our city commission. And I would like to let you know that since we have last met together, we have a new city commissioner, Commissioner Adam Marl. You'll see him on the screen. He's waving at you. He's brand new to our city commission. So I just wanted to introduce him to you as we get started. So with that, I'm not sure who's going to lead. I don't know if it's Chairwoman.
Yes. Thank you, Rachel Lyles. It's here among friends again. I remember when we were there the last time and what a good time we had together. And, you know, I think we're almost getting back to the place where we can meet again. So I look forward to that. So I'm Charlie. I'm the chairwoman of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. I am a direct descendant of the treaty signer of the Bull Falls area. Chief Wachino was my great-grandfather. His name is affixed to the first there was a Clackamas tribe treaty, which was in 18 signature was on there. That one wasn't ratified. It was folded into the 1855 treaty with the Capuyas and with all of the tribes that were in the area. So this is truly a pleasure for me to be here and to be part of the visioning of the Blue Heron property. I can say that I have at least 2 other tribal council members with me. I don't know where John went, but I see his name still affixed there.
Okay, there
John,
all right.
There's John George. He's our secretary to our tribal council, and he works. We have Michael Lally, who is on our council, a very active member, and I really appreciate him being here. Do we have anyone else, Stacia? I know I seen Stacia there a bit ago too, but I guess not. But Stacia and Ryan Webb are our staff of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and we're very blessed to have them. They are very talented young people, and I know that they've done a tremendous amount of work, a lot of hard work in getting together to the visioning document, and we're very pleased that we're able to present this to you tonight. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it back over to you, Mayor, or if you want Stacia and Ryan to present, that's up to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kennedy. Stacia, I believe you may have one other person on, Mr. Langley.
Yes, Michael Langley is one of our tribal councilmen, and then we're also joined by Martha Pellegrino, who we work with in the Portland area.
Okay, perfect.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here and good to see you all, and especially good to be talking about this topic, which is one of my favorites. I'm not right from that area, but my ancestry goes up and down that Columbia River and the Willamette. So I'm very happy to be here and see everybody.
All right, welcome.
Yes. And
Welcome.
John
Welcome,
George.
John.
Yeah, Tribal, good to see you all too. And Denise, good. I see you, Commissioner McGriff, as I sit on the Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Coalition with her. Rocky, I'd love to see you too. I sit on the Clackamas Heritage Partnership Board with her at the end of the Oregon Trail. So just very happy to see you all and being at this opportunity too. And you know what, I think Michael too, are so, proud to be able to talk about this and present it. And like you said, and to see progress happening so quickly there at our site, at our new site. And so I'm just thankful to be here, and thank you for meeting with us too. And we look forward for our partnership, as we always say, to turn into friendships. So so we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, Stacia, I'm not sure, you want to have your presentation or,
I will share my screen. Give me just one moment.
and you may have to speak up, Stacia. You're a little hard to hear.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Not really.
Let me,
We can hear you really well.
how about now? Is that better?
Yes, that's
Okay.
better.
I'll get a little closer and try to project. I apologize. Well, thank you so much. We're honored to have this opportunity and really excited to present this document to you all. We did send the larger version over, and it is publicly available online for folks that are interested in viewing it. You can visit our website at www.grandron.org. So we've cut it down quite a bit for you so we can hopefully have more dialogue. And with that, we'll get started. So a lot of the information that we took out of tonight's presentation was really information just going over the site's history. You all are very familiar with the site. You get to see it every day. So we figured we won't, go into those details. So this graphic right here just illustrates, obviously, where the site is. You can see the Blue Heron property outlined in red. And then we also, on this page, identified two of our important historic villages. The next slide that we cover in our visioning document really kind of sets the tone for the entire document. It was really exciting to work with our council because we really kind of went back to the very beginning and then worked our way forward to see really what the vision could be for the future. So we start with Econom, which is our storied time, Lifeways, which is life in use prior to 1820, Early Incursion, which is a contact window between 1820, 1840, and 1845, Removal in 1840, 1845 through 1860. And as Chairwoman Kennedy said, prior to that, we had the 1851 unratified Treaty of the Clackamas. And then we have ultimately the signing of the Willamette Valley Treaty, which is ratified in 1855, which removed individuals to Grand Run. We then move on to survival and devastation between 1860 and 2011. Obviously, industry's been great, but it also had some things that weren't so great that went along with it. And then we have a unique opportunity now with the Grand Ron now owning the property to bring healing to the site, which we're really excited about. Just a few weeks ago, we were one of 11 multi-purpose grant awardees from the EPA, so we're really excited about that. That'll really help jumpstart our efforts on site. One of the exciting things our council discussed a lot too was not just economic development and the 4 core values that really lay the groundwork for the site, but this unique opportunity to add a 5th element, and that element being healing. It was really about striking a healthy balance on site and not really dominating the site with one thing over another. So with healing, we talk a lot about spirit, place, prosperity, and people. This next slide shows some of the current conditions. Obviously, the gray is the industrialized land, and then what we hope to be the restorative conditions. We looked a lot at the relationship between land and water, and we analyzed also where water would historically have flowed over the site prior to the dam, and then how that water was ultimately altered once the dam was in place. And Ryan will discuss more of this as he gets into his slides. We also identified a lot of site uses. This list is obviously not exhaustive. There are plenty of things we could do here. So we have restoration on site, which includes riverbank restoration, growing of native plantings, habitat restoration, scientific study and research. And then we also identified some Grand Run or CTGR uses. We're really excited to have an opportunity to bring life back to this place and to host and to be able to share this wonderful place with everyone. We talk a lot about river access and the ability for people to access the water or canoes to once again be in the water, gathering spaces, tribal spaces. And then when it comes to public spaces, we talk about the Riverwalk, which you'll see outlined in some of our diagrams, education, hotel and event space, restaurants and brew pubs, retail and shopping, river access, and then on the private development side, the potential for housing, nonprofit organization offices, higher education facilities, office and research. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Stacia. And thank you for allowing us to present this to you all tonight. We've done a few presentations now over the past few months, and every time we get the opportunity to present it, it adds a bit more excitement to what this project is, and especially being able to present here in Oregon City, where you guys are really going to experience the benefit that this vision document is going to bring to the site. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to present tonight. So when we started thinking about the vision document and how we wanted to move this work forward and what the tribe wanted to do with the site, as part of that work, we ultimately had to look about what the site is like today, and if there's any constraints that are there today that we need to kind of take into account to how to move the vision and development forward. So with that, we kind of looked early on at kind of a site analysis and looking at what there is today. So I think you're all very familiar, but on the east side of the property, you've got a very active railroad tracks, and you also have 99E. And those two things create a lot of noise along that corridor, along that side of the property. And then you kind of compound that with the vertical bluff that's right there, that basically reverberates those sounds that those two, the railroad tracks and the road create, and reverberates that back into the site. So really creating some noise that can have a negative impact on your experience out there on the site. You also have, kind of limited access to nature along the shoreline. So those natural areas along the shoreline is very inaccessible there to date. And then also, with the industrialization of the site, there's lots of buildings that are out there today. So, you could kind of walk down Main Street today and really not know that the river is right there, or the falls are down there at the south end of the property. So you really don't get that riverfront experience that you should be getting with such a beautiful place like this. Next slide, please. So from kind of understanding what the existing conditions are, we're then taking forward about how we want to kind of heal and restore the site. And Stacia mentioned something earlier about understanding what the relationship between land and water was prior to the industrialization of the site. And water would have flowed over a lot of the area where the dam is now, through restored channels and kind of a shoreline. And then you had the land piece where it would be the start of Oregon City. So what we really wanted to do is as part of our restoration, as part of our healing, is to really kind of bring that balance back to the site. And although we can't do anything about the dam, we really wanted to bring back the native vegetation to the site. We wanted to restore some of the river channels that were once there. So you can kind of see in these demonstrations, and I think there's two others in this presentation, but there are themes throughout that you will notice are very similar. And here you'll see the kind of the green shaded area is really the area where we want to do restoration and healing. So you can, we will be looking to restore river channels that were once there, looking to bring back native vegetation and get rid of invasive species, really kind of healing the site. You can also see on this demonstration, the beige areas are where, with that healing and getting you that experience and that sensory experience back with the river and the falls, is bringing the public back into this areas. The public haven't been able to access it for well over 100 years. So bringing the public back to experiencing it. And with that, it's establishing, not only access, but gathering spaces where we can kind of come together and experience it. So you can kind of see the beige areas are, potential areas for public spaces where people can come and really enjoy the riverfront and the view of the falls, etc. You can also see it in these demonstrations, really where the infrastructure and the utilities would go in as well. Again, kind of allowing the access and development to happen. So you bringing back Water Avenue that was once vacated, taking Main Street down all the way down to 3rd, reestablishing 4th Street as well, and then Railroad Avenue to kind of take you down to the south end and bring access all the way down to the south end of the property. These things allow the public access, but allows for the utilities and things to sustain the development. You can also see here those grayish blocks. They're areas of potential development for footprints of buildings, and then parking as well. So, Stacia, really kind of said it earlier that for us, when we look at this site, it's not your typical urban development. We're not planning on building out as much of this as possible. For us, the priority is really that healing and restoration of the site. There is an economic component to the work we are going to do, and you can kind of see that with those potential areas that we would develop. Those buildings are kind of placed more towards the east side of the property. One, to allow you, more of the experience of the sensory experience of the river and the falls. But like I mentioned earlier, those would help with reducing the noise impact that comes from those railroad tracks, from the 99E and bounces off the bluff. Having those buildings along there can kind of shield you from that noise and make the experience on the site that much better. You can also see there's like a brownish shading right in the center of that demonstration. That is where the Woolen Mill foundations are today. We feel that's a fabulous opportunity for kind of education and history of the site, really using that visual of that type of foundation to kind of show you where the site's been, and understanding the history of it, and kind of where we want to take it as well. When we were doing these demonstrations, we took into account, the potential, the connections, and the other potential public projects that surround the site today. So if you can kind of see the green dashed line, that's the alignment of the Riverwalk out to the Mill H overlook. There's it's kind of a sketch of a potential area for the pedestrian bridge to the bluff. It's not on here, but when we worked with ODOT for the Oregon City Westland Ped Bike Bridge, so work with them in terms of if an alignment were to come into our site, to make sure that the work we are doing as part of this vision, as part of this development, wouldn't prohibit any of these public projects that would come into the site. So it's something that we definitely looked at and make sure that our work doesn't prohibit or exclude any of those types of projects as well. Next slide, please, Stacia.
Ryan, if there's anything I could just add quickly, there is one departure here also from prior documents folks might have seen that the partners have put together, and we do call out for the removal of the clarifier. And we just thought, this is one of those strange things that I think a lot of people have kind of struggled to grapple with. It's, this giant round circular concrete thing out in the middle of the water. We saw this as being a really unique opportunity to restore that shoreline as well and really provide optimal views of the falls. It is quite obstructive, depending on where you are on site when you go to look at the water or go to look at the falls. So with the potential to remove it, again, this is still something that would be up for discussion. You could really get a better sense and visual of the falls in the water anywhere on site. So.
And Stacia, yeah, whatever. This is John, but yeah, they didn't like my idea. I thought we could make that into a Thunderdome, attraction, a competition.
That was the first thing off the table. Sorry, John.
Just kidding.
Thank you. So here is a couple more demonstrations of the site. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, there are some strong themes throughout these demonstrations, and those strong themes really are healing and restoration of the land, public access and allowing the public to come back and experience the river, experience the falls. And then as well, you've kind of got the economic development for the buildable areas, but those blocks that we were developed really remain the same as well throughout these demonstrations. So both demonstration B here and C, you can still see the area that would be restored with bringing back the river channels and native vegetation is really the same. The public's gathering spaces kind of change a little bit through them, but the theme is still there of allowing the public to come here, allowing them to kind of gather and experience this together. The parking and the building locations, again, for the most part, remain the same in terms of where they're kind of shown throughout there. And the same with some of the other items in terms of the Riverwalk project or the foundations for the Woolen Mill, etc. What you can kind of notice between B and C here, towards the south end of the property, up by the lagoon there, the kind of shading changes. But we have thought about that might be a good location for the tribe to have more of a private event space for where we want to do more private ceremonial events, things along that line. And that's not to say that the public wouldn't be allowed out there, but it just allows us the opportunity when we want to do private events. It's an easier one to close off as opposed to up by the Woolen Mill, etc. So that kind of changes a little bit through here, these demonstrations, but it allowed that area towards the south end of the property gives opportunity for kind of private spaces for the tribe to use for ceremony, etc. Next slide, please, Stacia. And here is a few renderings that are kind of within the vision document. So if you look at the bottom left of your screen, this would be if you're kind of standing on Main Street, looking south into the property, and that intersection there would be at 99E and Main. And we feel like that's a really great opportunity of a gateway into the site. Really letting people know, where you are on the experience you're going to get when you're on the site. In the top left, that rendering there, that sketch, that would be if you're really down towards the south end of the property, kind of south of the Woolen Mill foundations, looking in a northwest direction. That kind of building you can kind of see in the background there, that would be the footprint of where Mill O is today. We think that would be a fantastic opportunity for a potential hotel, just given the views up and down of the river. And then you've got kind of a public plaza in front of that, just to the south of that building. Would be again a fantastic kind of place for people to be able to gather, really get some great views of the river and of the falls as well. The rendering, the sketch there in the top right of your screen, that would be if you're up on the south end of the site, up on the bluff looking down. You kind of see the falls there in the background. You've got the lagoon. This is kind of the area I spoke about, potential tribal use for the Crown Ronde. And it allows us to potentially, if we need it for private ceremony, be able to close it off to public. But again, not to say that the public won't be able to use that as well. So you can see kind of like a little plank house there. But again, kind of great views as it opens up to be able to see the site. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, that sketch there, that's really, if you're really at kind of the southernmost point of our property, kind of in the lagoon area, looking north up to the site. So you've kind of got the lagoon there right in front of you, that kind of plank house that I spoke to you in that area. You've also the pedestrian bridge up to the bluff, that potential project and location in around there. But yeah, you can kind of really see how, with the restoration and the healing, where we're kind of opening this site back up and allowing the public to come back and experience it and really be able to use it and enjoy it. Is that the last of our slides, Stacia?
It
Okay.
is.
So I think at this time, unless Stacia or any other council members have anything else to add, I think we're happy to answer some questions.
I do. Before we get to questions, this is Chair Kennedy, if I may.
Yes, please.
This is thrilling to me each time I see the visioning document, and to visualize in my mind what this can be. And you probably have heard, but we've been awarded a significant grant to help clean up the area. And so not only do we believe in this, but there's a big agency of the United States that believes in the project and the work that can be done here and what can be realized. So, I'm very pleased that other people are hearing what we're saying about restoration and about healing and about what that means to us as a people, to be able to share in this great gift that's before us, the Willamette Falls that is thundering at times, other times more tranquil. But to know those sounds and the rhythms of the river is just so life-giving. I just can't really express how I feel about it. But we all know water is life, not only to humans, but to our earth, our land, our plants, our fish, our wildlife. And so in this effort, we're going to bring that kind of healing. And I'm just so proud of the work that's been going on so that this can happen sooner than later. To be able to look at it and to know that the cultural healing for my people is occurring, to know that that's happening, and that will spread through the whole area there. It's well, we can see, and this is a bad example, but we know what infection can do with all the epidemic the pandemic we're facing, but in a good way, that this healing will be applied and it will run across the whole valley there and be able to touch the hearts and the lives of people. The powerfulness of the river and the beauty there, it's a tremendous thing. When I look at and know about the stories that our people had there, stories of potlatch, which were really bringing people together, bringing them together to socialize, to enjoy one another, to be part of a bigger picture than just our tribal folks that live there, but for many other Native Americans that came there and visited with us and shared the food. And, my heart just feels, just talking about it is healing to me. So I just wanted to interject that before we moved along in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kennedy, for those remarks. I would like to say congratulations on your EPA grant. That's 800,000 toward the restoration. That's a significant grant. And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of folks in Oregon City probably don't know the work that you have been doing on the cleanup and the restoration and applying for the grant. I mean, it's a lot of work to do, environmental cleanup. And when folks just see the site, they probably don't see anything happening to the buildings. They're like, what's happening? And we understand. So I think it's great that work is starting and that you receive some federal funding with the EPA grant. So we're super excited about that. We have a project that we call the Quiet Rail Project. And I'm not sure if you're familiar of that, but it's a project where we've been wanting to try to see if we can make that railroad area quieter for our downtown as well. Remove the horn blowing, but it takes a lot of work. And as you probably are aware, working with the federal government and trying to get all the designs of the rail crossings. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And it's actually kind of an expensive project to have a quiet zone in our downtown. And so it's still on our to-do list. And I think, this project, in addition to all the other areas in downtown, would really benefit from having that quiet zone. It won't remove all of the train noise, but, if we can make some impact there, I know it's a desire of our commission. And it seems we try for federal funding. It's on the list right now of trying to get some federal funding for that project. So we share in the desires of trying to do some quietening of the noise that's happening in downtown Oregon City. So I'll look to my other fellow commissioners. Do you have any questions or comments for Chairwoman Kennedy or the other members for this presentation? I see Commissioner McGriff raising her hand.
Yes, good evening, everyone. And to our friends of the Grand Ronde, thank you so much for this presentation. This is the second time I've seen it, and I said it's getting better every time. So I don't know what you did added to it, Ryan, but it was there was more information this time. So thank you so much for that. But I think Mayor Lyle Smith, we all share in congratulating the Grand Ronde on their EPA grant. That is a major, major coup and an undertaking that only those of us who've been involved in doing environmental analysis know what that really is going to entail. And it's going to be so fantastic to have the site be cleaned finally. And in many ways it will be cleaned, but this will be environmentally cleaned, and we won't have to worry about any more polluted soil or things of that sort. So thank you again so much for applying for that and supporting that project. And everybody does think it's exciting. So thank you.
Other commissioners? Last call. Commissioner Smith?
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to this meeting tonight and appreciate the presentation. I have seen it, but I have not heard the presentation until tonight. So I appreciate that. And I am excited to see the partnerships continue. I've been very fortunate to be involved with the partnerships with the Grand Ronde Tribe through the End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, and I'm very excited to see the new movie. I haven't seen it yet in person, but I know that that's planned for the future. So that's very exciting. I also want to, commend the presentation in the sense that it really is an important piece to have this connection with the river. So I appreciate that focus on this plan, because a city that is on a river having such little access to it in this town is pretty amazing. We have Clackamas Park, which is a beautiful park that gives us some pretty good access, but along the downtown, that really has been a lacking piece of our community. So I definitely applaud the efforts to take some of the elements out and to revisit that connection to the river, not only because it's going to be so important for this site to have access to the river, but even more important to have access from the river to the site. And so I think that's incredible. I guess one of the questions that I still kind of have, with this site, we are balancing, and in terms of the tribe's mission and vision and the community's vision and mission, we are weighing a lot of different histories, a lot of different layers, and that's very difficult to do on a site like this. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of that. I guess one of the questions I have is this vision that has been presented tonight, differs in some ways from the original vision that the community started with in 2014. And I think, in some ways, it adds elements to that. And I think in some ways there's some pieces that, I think the public may be questioning at some point. One of which I think that really stands out is it appears that there's kind of a plan for the removal of virtually all the buildings. And the 2014 master plan calls at least 5 buildings or structures out to be saved and restored, or at least if they are removed or altered, have to go through a type 3 land use process. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how that process might go in the moving forward of the Grand Ronde plan. Definitely, I appreciate the ability to keep the effort to design around the Woolen Mill Foundation and also the understanding of the balance of the story that you want to tell versus necessarily the industrial history of the site. But I think it's kind of going to be a careful tie to how we still tell some of that industrial story on that site, even if some of those buildings will come down. I guess I just want to know what the process would be in terms of publicly how to deal with the individual buildings that were called out in the original 2014 master plan as ones to save or try to preserve.
That's actually a great question and something we failed to mention in our presentation, which we have been including in other presentations.
Okay.
So we actually are working on a historical building assessment to go in and assess those buildings that were identified. So I'll let Ryan touch on that as we go through that process, or at the conclusion of that process, we'll obviously be planning an open house or an update, not just for the commission, but for the public that's interested. So Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about our plans for that?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that question up. It was a question that Commissioner McGriff brought up in our last presentation. So I'm glad that you. I'm glad that you brought it up as well. We should have touched upon it in our presentation. But so we are aware that there's some of those buildings on the site that have been called out to have historic preservations on them. So what we plan to do, we're about to kind of embark on a master planning, effort with the site. So kind of using this vision document as a framework to kind of then move forward with that. And as part of that work, we're going to be looking at those buildings that were called out. We will look to do kind of an assessment on that from a structural standpoint, figure out what condition those buildings are in. I will say, unfortunately, being dormant for a decade and even probably not the best of maintenance work happening prior to that even, and, the elements have not been kind to a lot of those structures on the site. So, but what we will plan to do is kind of do an assessment of those buildings that have been called out to see what we can do, what we can, save, what we can, reuse, all of those types of things, and try and then weave that into what our master plan will be for the site.
All right. Yeah, I know we've on the amount of trips that I've taken out to the mill site in the last 10 years, we've definitely seen a major change in some of the buildings and what they're going through. One other question is that is something that has come up from a city level, not just about the mill site and the future of the mill site and the Willamette Falls site, but in terms of downtown in general, and that's parking, which is a key element of this design. We go through various components of discussions in the city about talking about parking garages. It looks from your vision on this site, you're kind of leaning towards parking lots on one level rather than a central parking garage. Is that is there a reason for that, or a strategy with kind of going towards individual lots rather than, and I know price tag is part of that probably, in terms of a parking garage versus, individual parking lots?
No, I mean, another good question. So, with those demonstrations where it calls out to parking, it's not necessary to say that that is surface parking and that's what it is.
Sure. Okay.
It's definitely something that, we have looked and we will look in terms of a structured parking thing. I think how we plan to go about the phasing of not only the cleanup and the remediation work, but really the construction of the site as well. So, how we want to phase in the infrastructure and the utilities, and then how that phasing that affects the phasing for the development itself. And then the phasing of development will, ultimately affect, so there's going to be a breaking point probably where, surface parking is now not enough, or we're using that surface parking to develop, and we go to, a structured parking. So it's, in that schematics that we kind of have shown you, those aren't necessarily meaning they're only surface parking. We understand that there's definitely not only a need for this site itself, but really working with the city to kind of, service the need for the area. So it's definitely something we will be looking for as with our master plan about, parking initially as we develop the site, but then the long-term piece of that as well.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question that I don't expect a very deep answer, because this is a conversation that has been on the topic of the city commission for a long time, and it's been semi-divisive. But when you mentioned the plan to be kind of open for these public infrastructure projects in terms of the River Walk, but also mentioned the conversation with ODOT about the pedestrian bridge. ODOT has presented to us several times about the different variations and concepts for the alignment of that. And ODOT, in their last presentation, gave us some feedback from the tribe's interpretation or vision in terms of their preference, I would say, towards the alignment. So I guess I'd like just a little bit more insight as to the tribe's feeling on that alignment, and clearly a lot of our concerns are the historic significance of the site, and maybe artifacts or other histories of the site that we want to be concerned about in terms of the alignment of that bridge. But maybe just to give a simple explanation of really what your feelings are on the preference of that alignment and why. Because I think that would be very helpful to us. Like, in some respects, I definitely want to be aware of the concerns of the tribes about that alignment, but I also see the ability for an alignment that ends at that site to also spur development and spur an interest in going to the site. So I'm kind of trying to balance that in my own personal assessment of what the alignment should be, but I guess any input on that would be helpful to me to understand.
And we had our cultural resources staff analyze this closely with Ryan, and Ryan served on the committee. So I'll let him kind of talk a little bit about how we landed where we did. Obviously, I think we favored both of the alignments at the end of the day, but saw this as, very forward looking. So Ryan, do you want to go ahead and touch on that?
Yeah, definitely. And like Stacia said, we definitely, very supportive of either, alignment, whether it's north of the Arch Bridge or if it comes into our site. And we understand the benefits to the region for either one. When we looked at it as how it would come into our site and the impacts to our site, we work closely with our TIPO office to look at that. As part of the work that we have done on site and will continue to do on site is anytime we are doing any type of subsurface disturbance, and we've done stuff like getting trenching to put permanent power to one of the buildings, those types of things. Our TIPO staff are on site with us to document and see what is happening. And then that allows us, and they're also out there, doing ground penetrating radar, really. And what they're doing is trying to build up an understanding of what is out on our site today. So really get to know if there's particular sensitive areas where they may be. So, with that work that they're doing and with the work that we're kind of continuing to do on the site, what we have kind of said to ODOT is the work that we're doing there only provides more information to this sensitive area in terms of, if there were to be areas that need to be avoided, that the work we're doing can really highlight those up early on in their process for that particular project. And it's not to say that, the areas north of the bridge aren't just as sensitive as this area.
Right.
That the 99E was really the trail down into the site. So, with that being said, it's not, there could be some unknowns there that are just equally as culturally sensitive as stuff on our site as well. So, we looked at that, and I think what works well with our site is that you're not, where the bridge would ultimately land isn't set in stone that it has to be, like the alignment 7 is shown to be at 10th and Main, because that would be a 10th and 99E, because that's a good location. Really on our side, it can slide up and down from 4th Street all the way to the elbow of 99E. And that gives you some flexibility with that alignment, that if you were to become across an area that's kind of sensitive when you're doing your design work, you've got the ability to be able to shift that up and down on the site to do that. So there's some flexibility with the alignment as it comes into our site for doing that. And, like I said, the work that we're actively doing on site is only allowing us to build up a better idea of what's out there is. Again, giving ODOT a lot more information to make a good decision on where that will go. So we, like I say, we will continue anytime we're doing any kind of subsurface work. Our TIPO guys are out there. They're notifying the state through permits to making sure that the state Historic and Preservation Office knows what we're doing. And we're very much doing our guys are doing a great job of documenting everything that's they're finding when we're out there.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, because I'm always very concerned. I was very concerned when we were talking about John Storm Park and the outfall project there and other projects. So I'm always kind of wondering that question, and definitely hope that there's a good connection between the tribes and the state to make sure that those are being checked out. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
All right, and Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to our guests tonight. I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name's Adam Marl, and I'm really looking forward to working with the tribe. And at this point, I don't have a question because Commissioner Smith took mine on the bike ped bridge. So I appreciate him for mind reading for me right there. And I appreciate that insight that you just gave. But I just wanted to introduce myself and say, I've grown up here in Oregon City, driving past that site, and I'm really looking forward to the prospect of the prospect of us moving forward. And I think that, as the mayor said, a lot of people don't recognize the amount of work that's going into it, but we all know that there are going to be some great things happening really soon. And so I'm just really looking forward to that, and looking forward to working with you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Morrow. So I guess I don't see any further questions. So I'm sure that this presentation will spur some excitement within our city of folks that see the presentation of the vision for that Blue Heron site. I've heard a lot of comments, look at those old buildings. Can't we get something new and pretty? And there's just so much potential for that site. So I know there's a lot of excitement that our community would love to see the advancement of the development of that site. And lots of challenges with it that we've talked about, it from historical buildings to cultural resources to it just goes on and on. So it is a complicated site, but we are still thrilled to see the potential. And I'm sure our community, like I said, will be thrilled to see the vision that you've laid out of potential development and beautification and restoration of that site. So, and with that, I will say good night and thank you for presenting to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Righty, Chairwoman Cheryl and Mayor Smith too. We just didn't have the opportunity for our other councilwoman Denise to be able to introduce herself. She, I know these technology things of getting on and all that stuff. So I just would like to maybe have the opportunity for her to introduce herself in any words she may have.
Okay.
Hi, yeah, thank you. My name's Denise Harvey and I'm on the tribal council. I've been on the council for a little more than 8 years. And I just want to say I so value the work that we're doing there and having the opportunity to heal this beautiful place in Oregon and to be able to share that with Oregonians and make it something to share with the public and the people of Oregon that nobody's been able to do for many, many years. So I've been watching that project since 2013, 14, and was very grateful and honored when we were able to purchase the property and be able to move it into the next century of what it's going to be and how beautiful it's going to be. And I just can't wait to see the people out there enjoying it. And I think it's definitely going to be something that people are really going to appreciate. And I appreciate all the support and enthusiasm about the project. So just looking forward to it getting done and appreciate your time tonight for to allow us to present this to you. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for introducing yourself to our coming and for your remarks. All right. With that last call, thank you, Stacia, and thank you to everybody, Ryan, for your presentation. And thank you for presenting.
All right.
Thank you.
Hayumasi. Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Mhm.
All right, so that completes our discussion item number 1. And
Rachel, you're breaking up pretty bad.
Lots of.
It's better now.
I'll turn off my video and see. Okay. Yeah, I got the internet is unstable warning. So we'll move to item number 2. This is the geologic hazards proposed amendments to chapter 17.44. We did receive 2 public comment items this afternoon. I know I have not had a chance to fully read those, so I don't know if folks need a break or need a chance to read those or if we want to plow on, but Mr. Conkle, who's taken the lead on this one?
This will be John Lewis and Josh Wheeler.
Okay, Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I only saw one item. Were there 2? I received something from Christine Kaczynski. We did. Was there something else?
Yeah, the latest one came in at 5:30 p.m. So kind of late, may not have seen it. It's codes from HBA, Home Builders Association. And I believe that comment, if it's the same one, I haven't seen it. Like I said, it came in late, so I have not seen it. HBA the Home Builders Association had presented comment when
Yes.
originally on the agenda, like a month and a half ago. And unfortunately, we just have kept moving this one down the road because other things have come up. So, all right. So that's all the public comment that I'm aware of that have come in on that item. So. All right. So with that, I'll turn it to you, Mr. Lewis. Looks like you're teed up.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Good evening. The majority of the work that has gone into this is work that Josh has done. So he oversees the development review side of our house, and that's mostly where this code comes into play, is in development review. So he's had a lot of, I would say, concerns and just interest in updating that code for a long time. That's true for much of our code changes, by the way. So Josh did a forum a while back. I don't recall who all sat through that forum, but Josh sponsored that and got the expert testimony to present at that. And so anyway, he's had this ready to go for the commission for a long time now. And I know he's going to get through it pretty quickly. So Josh, you want to take a run at this? And I'm assuming you or Katie have the presentation, because I don't.
Yes, I have the presentation, and let's see if I have ability to share. Do I have that?
You should.
Yep, looks like I do. I turn it into a presentation. Maybe. Go backward. All right, am I showing full screen now?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, here we are. All right, you all know me. You all know John. So thank you for having us tonight. We're going to go through the Geologic Hazards Code, portion of the code, its history, the history of the landslides, and the proposed code revisions. And after we provide this presentation, we'll be providing the option to the City Commission of proceeding to request more specific detail on these topics, or proceed to a June 16th meeting for the first reading of a adoption of an ordinance. So way back in November 18th, 2020, we were in a meeting and we discussed the various code revisions. And at that time, staff was given direction to detail certain portions of proposed code in future work sessions. So we presented all the items now besides the review of the geologic hazards, and that's why we're tackling this. This would be what you've been hearing from planning as we've been continuing meetings, the third part of the code revisions. So these revisions, they came from a request of the City Commission all the way back in October of 2019, where you asked staff to review our existing geologic hazards code in relation to the newly published landslide guide published by DLCD and Dogami, which was presented at that time. As we provided proposed code revisions in 2020, the City Commission requested additional information concerning slopes and the waiver program. And so those are the only two topics we're going to talk about tonight. We're assuming that the other minor cleanup revisions are not of concern, although we're happy to talk about those as well, because we know it's been a long time. So first on waivers. Most of this presentation is going to be about the slopes, but really with the waivers, due to advice from the city attorney, and Ms. Richter's on as the assistant city attorney to answer any questions you have as well tonight. We stopped that program in January 1st, 2021. We were considering codifying the program. That brought up too many questions, and so we needed to end the program of providing waiver. The program ran from approximately 5 years, allowing the city's geotechnical consultant to waive certain properties from going through a type 2 land use process based on the impacts being minor, but not really falling under the exemptions that are in the code. This included items like foundation repair, pole barns, sign installations with deep foundations, and other improvements that were not exempt by code. Any project that impacts a geologic hazard overlay zone now must go through a type 2 land use review unless it meets one of our exemptions. Now, it always went through a type 2 land use review without the exemptions, but there used to be that little caveat of a waiver. Without the waiver, now they all go through that. And Ms. Turway asked me to state that I want to remind you that a type 2 review for a geologic hazard does cost at this time with the fee schedule $979 for someone to apply for that. So the commission should understand that since that program of waiver has ended, we have had a few properties come in that normally would have received a waiver, which now do need to spend time and money to go through a type 2 process and hire a geotechnical consultant. That has been with foundation repairs at this time. While it is an extra burden to the property owner to be extra cautious, it does seem appropriate to require them to go through the process if the intent is to provide the best safety guidance we can provide. And I know one of those I'm in a pre-app for tomorrow. And while it may have fell under a waiver in the past, our geologic consultant is actually very happy that we're going through it tomorrow because he has concerns. Even though it's a foundation repair, we feel we need to look at it a little more specifically.
So Josh, before you leave that slide, I have a quick question. So are you saying anything, any type of development on a property? You mentioned a pole barn and maybe I misunderstood you. So like anything, even if it's not going to be inhabited by a person, would require a type 2 review?
Yes, unless it meets one of the 4 exemptions in the code. And I'm going to go over those exemptions in about 2 or 3 slides from now.
Okay. Okay.
So to set us on the right track of thought here, we thought it was important to make sure everyone understood how we define a geologic hazard. So the Oregon City Municipal Code in our definitions section of 1704 talks about geologic hazard areas and geologic hazards overlay zones. So I don't expect you to read what's on the slide there, but those are the definitions and specifics. I'll summarize them. The geologic hazard definition defines what a hazard is, which is anything with a slope of 25% or greater and within 200 feet of that area. And then a geologic hazard overlay zone is the area regulated for a geologic hazard, which is more specific, and it includes the mapped slope area with its buffer, as well as the mapped landslide deposit area and its buffer. So any property intending to build within a geologic hazards overlay zone is required to be processed through the type 2 land use decision unless it meets those exemptions. So to your question, what are those exemptions? A summary of this slide would be that the exemptions are this: a cut or fill of less than 2 feet in depth, a structural alteration or addition of less than 500 square feet, work on utility lines, removal of noxious vegetation, and tree removal where less than 25% of the canopy is impacted. So for the examples of a foundation repair where they're going 10 feet into the ground to fix the foundation and stabilize it, that's going into the ground more than 2 feet, and so it is not exempted. For a sign that may be going into the ground or a pole barn that may be going into the ground more than 2 feet, they're cutting or they're digging out a hole more than 2 feet, and so those are not exempt anymore. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So you don't take into account at all whether or not the facility that they're building would house people, for example.
Correct, because the thought pattern is that if you're disturbing the ground, no matter if someone's living in it or not, will that affect that structure that you're putting in, but also will it affect the downstream or the downhill properties as well? So
and how did you decide that 25% cut of trees or removal of tree was okay?
That is all of those exemptions are things that have been in the code at least since 2010, and I think even prior to that. It's how were those numbers decided? I don't have that answer, but I do have answers of why I believe they should remain there, and we're going to get into that.
Well, I think the minimum should remain there. My concern would be that when folks start removing trees from sloped property, it increases instability. And so I just want to make sure that that's not a contributing factor to future issues. That's why I was wondering
Yep.
for that.
And we review those fairly often, actually. Yeah. Most of the time, it's someone removing one tree on a property that has tons of trees, and so it does not trigger that 25% number.
I agree with you, Mayor
Or
Lyles.
it does. Yeah.
I think that's a problem.
Is it 25% of the property or 25% of the trees are being removed?
25% of the canopy on a geologic hazard zone. So if you're within one of these yellow areas, let's say 25% of your property is within a yellow area and your whole property is full of trees, we're only looking at the yellow area, the geologic hazard zone area. So 25% of the zone area, if you're removing the canopy, which doesn't mean number of trees, or means the drip line of the tree, then that's when that's triggered. So you could have a case where one tree does trigger that. It's fairly rare, but it could happen. Yeah.
I still think it's problematic. I'm just pointing that out, that I will be asking more questions about that.
Awesome. All right, well, moving to the background here. So slopes in the overlay zone are determined.
Oh, Josh,
Yes.
hang on. Commissioner O'Donnell has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you looking at 25% of the canopy removed within 200 feet of either the crest or the toe? Is that what you're talking about?
The geologic hazard zone.
The entire
is-
property.
The geologic hazard zone follows either the landslide deposit or the slope plus its buffer. So we're looking at the entire geologic hazard zone. We're not looking at the whole property. We're looking at whatever is in the geologic hazard zone.
So it could be all or a portion of a piece of property that's within the geologic hazard area. And then the 25% canopy is calculated based off of the amount of the land that's within the geologic hazard area,
Correct.
which could be the whole property or it could be a piece of the property.
Okay, so we're saying that in that area that has that 25% slope, either crest or toe, that's where we do the calculation. Say there's a big flat area between it. Do we include that in the calculation?
If the slope or landslide deposit is a certain shape, certain size, and then you take its buffer, if it's a landslide deposit, it's 200 feet. If it's a slope, it's 50 feet. That more than likely covers your crest or your toe of slope that you're talking about. That's probably why those numbers were picked in the past as well.
You're muted.
I said I'm done, thanks.
Okay.
So I'll move on.
Yes. Oh, wait. Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, thank you. So do we give people a list of what noxious vegetation is? Because unfortunately, I am very aware of properties around Oregon City where there was the alleged statement that they were removing noxious vegetation, which obviously Clackamas County has the list and the state of Oregon has a list. I have it right on my shelf over here. And all of a sudden the entire piece of property has been cleaned off. And so do we give people a list of what that is?
I can tell you I've been with the city since April of 2018, and I have not had one person come in requesting a permit for clearing noxious vegetation. If they did ask for it, we would work with planning since they deal with the landscape code, and then we might end up with an arborist or something to tell us whether or not it's noxious or not. If
I'm just letting you know that there is a booklet that you can get from the OSU Extension Service that lists noxious weeds and vegetation of Oregon. So it's very easy. You can get it and it's free.
We're just not professionals that have the ability to truly, I would not be comfortable determining what is noxious and what is not, even with a book. I want a professional to do that.
They are professional, Josh, I assure you.
Yeah, but I want them to decide, not me.
They're listed in the book. You know, Scotch broom, butterfly bushes, tree heaven. I could go on.
Yeah, and again, no one has asked for that. So if people are doing that, they're doing that without asking for a permit.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
All right, so slopes in the overlay zone are determined by the city's GIS mapping using aerial photography, which is translated into topographic contours. Landslide deposits are imported into GIS using the most recent data from Dogami. Buffers are then mapped according to the definitions that we went through. And so the yellow area in the picture you see combines slope and landslide deposit as one geologic hazard overlay zone in the city. This slide here, your picture on the right actually is the upper side of Waterboard Park, the road that goes up there, or did go up there. But this slide, the data here, shows that the slope criteria has always been 25% or greater in recent history and is proposed to remain that way. And I know that may change and that may be controversial, but here's the reason why staff would recommend that to remain as we go through. What this slide shows, and it may be a little too small, so I will summarize it. It shows other criteria that other Oregon government agencies use. We found that slope criteria for geologic hazards varies throughout Oregon from 5% in Eugene to 35% in Astoria. And this chart comes from the recently published guide from DLCD. In the metro area, Multnomah County has the highest with 25%, and West Linn has the lowest at 12 to 15%. It's really difficult to compare all cities, though, in Oregon, or even in the metro area due to the differences in their geologic makeup. If you take the list of communities shown, the average slope is 19.19%. That may make some consider that Oregon City should at least be 20% instead of 25%. However, statistically, this is a random list of cities that are not necessarily representative of every Oregon city that has a geologic hazard code. It is a sampling, and we should ask ourselves what role slope plays in Oregon City's geologic hazards. Oregon City's 25% slopes compare to Beaverton, Newport, Tigard, Sandy, and Multnomah County, all of which are located in much different areas of the state or even metro area. And just as a note, Clackamas County itself uses 20%. We want to provide you with as many facts as we can tonight. Slope is regulated in Oregon City in the following way. 0 to 25% has no constraints from a geologic hazards perspective. Properties within 25 to 35% slopes are buildable, but regulated through a type 2 land use decision, which require a geotechnical engineer and usually require a reduced density and disturbance, as well as a minimizing of cuts and fills. Properties of 35% or greater are only allowed to be impacted if it is the only way to provide an economic benefit to the property, and if so, it must be substantially minimize their density, disturbance, and cuts and fills. In general, disturbance of lands with 35% or greater should be avoided. However, we have realized over time, while slope is easily measurable and understood, the reasons behind landslides in Oregon City have been related to historic landslide deposits, not slope. For additional information on slope, the picture on the left shows all slopes with Oregon City, and the picture on the right shows all landslide deposits within Oregon City. Not surprisingly, landslide deposits typically are located within steeper slopes. So when you're looking on the picture on the left, the green color are slopes of 10% or less. The yellow color is 10 to 25%. The orange color is 25 to 35%. And the reddish or pinkish color is 35%. And so when you look at the reddish or pinkish color, you start overlaying that with the landslide deposit, you'll see that they match fairly often. The history of landslides within Oregon City is long and varied. And over the past 20 years, 5 major landslides have occurred which were impactful. All occurred on an old landslide deposit that moved due to rainfall. These are shown if I don't know how visible that is on your screens, but there's an X on each of the landslide deposits. Forest Edge apartments built in the 1990s experienced landslides in the 2000s, and then the most significant within the last 5 years on Christmas Eve, requiring emergency evacuations. The property just completed an extensive land use review, which resulted in monitoring wells, water reduction, and construction this past year. They are now working in re-inhabiting these apartments. Trillium Drive had to be closed in 2017 due to a landslide movement. Replacement of the sanitary sewer will begin soon, and a design to reopen the roadway is seeking funding. South End Road has been slowly sliding for a number of years in an area of county jurisdiction. They are looking at improvements over the next couple of years. Waterboard Park has had historic sliding, and the old roadway was closed some time ago. The Peters Scheme neighborhood will be having a water main replacement completed that was necessary due to a past landslide as well. But is slope the determining factor for a potential landslide? Historically, the most landslides occur at 30% slope, as shown in this data provided by Scott Burns of Portland State University. Locally, we know that those 5 major landslides that I listed have occurred where there were existing landslide deposits. While there was slope nearby, the reason for movement was that the existing deposit was unstable and moved. Knowing the location of landslide deposits is equally important and potentially more important than slope. Professionals from DLCD, Portland State University, and Foundation Engineering all believe we should not solely look at a property's slope and that 25% is a reasonable number. In fact, new proposed code revisions recommend retaining the 25% slope criteria, but add that density and land use review also are triggered by existing landslide deposits. Currently, our current code only makes you look at slope with respect to density and land use review. You only look at slope. We are proposing that you add existing landslide deposits because that's the reason things are moving. Existing landslide deposits were not previously codified as a reason to minimize density or the amount of land disturbance, and so we're proposing that. You'll note in this exhibit to the right that most of the red areas, which cover the 25% or greater slopes, are located within the existing landslide deposits. The landslide deposits are outlined in black, and you'll see a lot of the red color is within the landslide deposits. We looked at what we could change at smaller slopes and what the impact would be. Again, orange being 20%, yellow being 15%, green being 10%. We found that very little would change and additional regulation would rarely occur except for the 10 to 15% slopes, which are not near any existing landslide deposit areas. Close-up of the map is going to be on the next 2 slides. So again, red is 25% or greater. And again, note that a majority of the 25% or greater slopes fall within map landslide areas. Orange is 20, yellow is 15, and green is 10. This close-up shows the various slopes in a different area of the city, the northern part. This area of the city experiences fewer landslides as well as having any existing landslide deposits. This chart here tells us if we change the slope, what the impact to the city would be. There are 12,402 tax lots within the city. The current standards of 25% or greater affect almost 2,500 tax lots out of the 12,000. If the criteria was changed on slope from 25 to 20%, an additional 528 tax lots would be added, which gets you to a total of a little over 3,000. If the slope was changed to 15%, the total tax lots impacted is around 4,200 tax lots out of 12,000. And if we dropped all the way to 10%, over 7,100 tax lots would be affected out of the 12,402 tax lots that exist. So how's this all come together at a staff level? If a property is mapped as a geologic hazard and the mapped area is being disturbed, it triggers a type 2 land use review and starts with a pre-application meeting. Staff then provides the requirements, which is generally to minimize cuts and fills, as well as reduce the density and disturbance. A property with 25 to 35% slopes is only allowed a maximum of 2 dwelling units, unless the 25 to 35% slope is a ½ acre or less, then they're only allowed 1. Also, for areas of 25 to 35% slopes, the disturbance area is maximized as 50% of the area or 4,000 square feet, whichever is less. So the most anyone can disturb is 4,000 square feet. Areas of 35% or greater are to be avoided unless it makes the parcel economically unable to develop. But again, current code does not consider the existing landslide deposits, and so that's only based on slope. If we made the change to add landslide deposits, then that density of 2 dwelling units or 1 dwelling unit and the disturbance of 4,000 square feet or less would also be triggered if we added in the landslide deposits as we propose. And just to note, properties like Forest Edge Apartments, with our current code, would be able to build on the flat area and avoid the slope area, but they'd still be at risk of sliding due to the building on top of the existing landslide deposit. If we changed the code and added in the landslide deposits, that development would have been minimized and reduced to a much smaller development. Almost done here. The ultimate goal of the Geologic Hazard Code is to improve safety, minimize risk to the property owner, minimize risk to the city, and reduce the probability of a landslide. But just know you will never eliminate the risk of a landslide when developing property on steep slopes or historic landslide deposits. The best way to achieve these goals is through providing additional constraints on properties with geologic hazard characteristics and educating the public. Staff has proposed additional constraints by requiring proper density not only when a steep slope exists, but also the landslide deposit. The city provides an online community forum, provided one back in September of 2020, which is available to view on the city's website and YouTube page. The city also has a web page with links to the various landslide guides. And the city also makes a prospective buyer fully aware of constraints in the investigative phase, as well as the land use phase. So quite often someone will come in just to the counter and ask about it, and we give them every bit of information we have. Sometimes they choose to go forward, and then we give them that information again with even more detail at a pre-application conference. And then they want to go forward, and they have a large land use decision that puts a lot of constraints on what they need to do. Our job is to make them aware of the risk and help them understand how to mitigate it. Staff and our geotechnical peers and consultants, again, do not believe a change in slope will achieve these goals and therefore is not recommending the change. And by the end of a project, the city also requires the indemnity agreement, which allows an applicant to acknowledge they have taken on risk, but also limits the liability of the city in the event of a future landslide. So in summary, staff recommends no change to the slope, but does recommend addition of landslide deposits. And expecting some questions, but if we come to conclusions with those questions at the end of this presentation, we would then bring a code to you on June 16th. But if we need more time, we need to come back in a future work session, we would just ask for that direction. And those are all the codes that we've done and the one that's left that we're talking about. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Josh. So Commissioner Griff, I don't think you ever took your hand up. Do you have a set of questions that you want to ask?
Oh, sorry, I did not. I'm taking notes, but yes. I went back to my notes from the first time and second time this was presented, and I believe that I had gotten a general consensus to take a look at reducing the 25%. So what happened to that?
We did look at that, and when we started looking at the impact, this is what this map here is how we looked at what the impact was, and we found that if we reduced it, it really wouldn't change much. The orange and the red, you can barely decipher between them, even when you go in a little closer. The green and the yellow, as we talked to the experts in the field, they felt that did not have a need, and then it would just be more constraining and would not improve safety overall. It was an unnecessary regulation according to the professionals.
Okay, well, I guess I will respectfully disagree that I do not feel that way, and I feel that we need to reduce it at least to 20%. We would not be in some of the predicaments that we have been in the past if we had had a much stronger code. So I appreciate the work, and I looked at that and I understand that. My concern is minimizing not only the risk to the public, but I am really keenly aware of I want to minimize the risk to the city. As you know, I've had experience with this, and based on some interesting information, some projects in the past were overturned, not based on sound information and sound advice. And I want to avoid that at all costs. So I'm going to stick with my request. The other thing is yes, I'm glad to see that you're adding in the landslide deposits, because I think that was critical to some, minimizing problems here in Oregon City. I'm hoping we can add that in going forward. I feel, very strongly about this because I've seen over time, longer than you've been here, Josh, properties that people claim to be careful about and then come back and look at them, 2 or 3 days later after they started construction, and the site's completely denuded. And I know that there's major concern in the Park Place area about properties there that are that have steep slopes, and there, I could go into a lot of editorializing about it, but I won't. But one of the reasons why the community had concerns about that area was the fact of the slopes, and they wanted it studied much more greatly than it ever was. So that's my concerns.
Okay, Commissioner Donald.
I'm going to support Commissioner McGriff, and I do so for a number of reasons. I'll make a comment on Josh's presentation. Our topography is fairly unique, and we do have a number of slopes that need to be considered. And I know that slope is not the only contributing factor. I get that. But it is a contributing factor. It is one of the contributing factors, as is loading. And it looks like you're trying to control loading on a building site by limiting what you can build in terms of sides. So, a point load, a weight load put on that very land. I definitely support the inclusion of landslides of any depth. I don't want to hear about it's only a 5 foot deep landslide or it's a deep landslide. It's a landslide. It's unstable. So I would say landslides of any depth. Whether it be Josh or John Lewis or myself, I think in our educational process, we all had soils classes. And we remember what it was like to see the emulsification of soils, or the difference between a sandy soil or a loamy soil or bedrock. And some of these permits at 35% are just trouble looking to happen, regardless of the mitigation efforts they take. So I'm in favor of reducing it. I did note the significant impact of going all the way down to 15%. I may be talked into settling for 20%, but even though you say slope is it's not the only factor, but it is a contributing factor and one which I can most easily control. I don't agree with allowing that 35% for economic impact. I mean, that's so problematic. So for the moment, I'll leave it at that, but I wanted to express my support for a reduction of some form. Thanks.
Okay, so I guess I'll go. So so one of the things that's really important to know here is that a lot of the development that has occurred where we've had problems have been approved prior to us actually having the detailed landslide inventory. And that is a pretty pivotal factor. And if you study the work that the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries has done using LIDAR data and identifying landslides, you can easily see and recognize the extreme benefit of this work and how monumental it was in the shift of knowing the locations of landslides and having a much better accuracy on where landslides currently exist. And so if it wasn't for that work that was done, I would be struggling with this, but I know there are many cities in Oregon that their goal is to have that more detailed landslide inventory completed by the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries using LiDAR data, because they know and they've already learned about the benefits of having that mapping done. So these proposed amendments would essentially codify or incorporate that detailed mapping that didn't exist before a few years ago. I'm not sure, Josh, or where did Josh go in my little squares? I don't know if you know the dates offhand that Degami did that inventory work, but prior to Degami doing that work with LiDAR data, the Oregon City would not have had really good information. Even if you had slope information, you wouldn't have had good information on landslides in order to make really good decisions on development applications. So with all that said, I support what the scientists are saying, which are overall, they're saying in support of the 25% because we're incorporating the inventories. If we didn't have the landslide inventory, I would not feel that way. I wouldn't feel that strongly. The areas where I have concern are, I'm wondering, is there a slope? Is there a situation that was considered where we would just say no building? I recognize that would trigger Measure 56 for Oregon City. And for those who don't know, that's essentially having to notify property owners when they're essentially devaluing their property, having to make financial, a financial assessment, or
It would be a takings.
Takings.
it would essentially be a takings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure that would trigger that. So I guess my question, regardless of that, of knowing that that's hanging out there, was that ever a consideration of that there is a slope where we, I'm shocked that over 35% we're still allowing, densities of 1 or 2 dwellings on a piece of property, depending on how big it is. Is there anybody that's saying no, just no, and we'll have to deal with the Measure 56?
So I believe Ms. Richter would be best to answer that.
Right. So I don't know of a jurisdiction that has denied any building at all. And it's not Measure 56 is a noticing issue that would have had to precede these amendments if we were going to prohibit development. That's different than Measure 49 takings claim, where a regulation reduces the value of land and then the local government has to compensate the applicant or the developer for the impact. Right. So those are 2 different measures, but both of them are of concern. And, I think, we could go down to 1 dwelling, but we couldn't prohibit development altogether. I mean, we might be able to in some circumstances if the facts were just right, but from the sort of 10,000 foot level, no development would be difficult for the city, I think.
And I can tell you that there's 2 properties I'm thinking of that have had building on 35% or greater. They did a substantial amount of work compared to the normal geologic hazard person to prove to us that it was safe. So we do have enough language in there that allows us to say, until we're comfortable, you can't build. You have to prove to us that it's highly unlikely you're going to cause a problem. And
Right.
then we still require the indemnity agreement. But yeah, those two properties I'm thinking of, they went through a long, arduous process.
Right. Okay. And thanks, Carrie. Yes, for correcting me on my measures. You are as usual, very correct. And I'm like, oh, yes. Thanks for straightening me out between measure 49 and 56. They do both come into play, or would come into play in that scenario. So I guess my last area that I'll mention of concern is the tree removal. I'm intrigued by this idea of tree canopy versus the amount of trees. So I don't know. I'm just concerned about that, and and I know it sounded like maybe that was something that's been in there for a while, and we didn't revisit that or didn't consider it, and so we were just moving it forward because it was in the code before. So I don't know did you discuss that with Scott Burns or Bill Burns, either one, about because I know there's a lot of mitigation that can be done when you're wanting to build on a property, but at the same time, I would think there would be a lot of information about as much about tree removal as there is on cut and fill type of scenarios.
Yeah, so we did not ask that question, whether we needed to change that. It was part of the code we intended not to touch. And so, but it obviously came up in this presentation because I needed to state what the exemptions were.
Right.
But like I said, during that slide, in the last 3.5 years, we've had a handful of people come in, and I've analyzed it for the tree situation. And almost every time it's been like one tree they want to take down, and there's like 20 trees out there. And so there's lots of trees there to keep the ground in place. And so it doesn't meet that 25% threshold, but should it be lower, we're open to listen.
Yeah, unfortunately, our codes aren't for the 1%. Our codes are really for the developers that come in and want to clear a whole piece of property that I'm most concerned about, not the ones who want to just remove one tree. All right, so I'm going to go to hands that in the order in which I believe they popped up, and it's going to be Mr. Lewis, then Commissioner O'Donnell, and then Commissioner McGriff. So, Mr. John Lewis. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts. First of all, on the Commissioner McGriff, the 20% analysis piece, we heard that pretty loud and clear the last time we heard from the commission on this topic, and that's why there was a fair amount of research that was done to kind of look at that information. So we didn't bring a proposal back for that because it's our job not to necessarily make that decision, but to kind of provide you with information that we see as kind of factual. So we are trying to do that. I do have a question for Carrie that maybe she can address, but if we move to a 20%, if we change from 25% to 20%, is there noticing requirements beyond just the ordinance that, because that would affect quite a few properties? I forget the number, Josh, but it was over 400 properties, I think, that it had some impact on as well. So I guess I have that question. And then the final piece was just, this, whether it's 20 or 25% or something different, even that is definitely a policy decision. We don't really want to get in the way of that. I just would say that we hope that it's kind of informed by the engineering and science. Our history of failures in this city have been before we had the robust code, geologic hazard code that we have. So I know those tend to come up. They're kind of some of the ugly history of our development community, but just keeping in mind that they'd be treated so much differently under today's code. So there's that. And then I guess last piece for me is that, when policy is made, and it is made in the sense, especially around development, I think for just about every commission, maybe almost every commissioner, the development community tends to really kind of come, this kicks back, staff kind of has to weather the storm with regard to that, those kind of changes with the development community. And lots of times, not only is it the developer who's questioning it, sometimes they have those conversations with commissioners, and especially new commissioners who weren't involved or passionate about this topic now, or at the time it was developed. And so they don't fully necessarily always understand it. It's a little, I guess what I'm getting to is it gets difficult. It can get difficult for staff to defend some of these when the science isn't there. So we're willing to do it. Just kind of acknowledge that these kind of topics come back, and they will come back for years down the road. And, especially without the waiver, that means that a lot of folks have to jump through some pretty big hoops to do things that aren't in that exemption list. So that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Richter, do you have an answer to Mr. Lewis's question about?
Sure. So Measure 56 notice is required when you change the zone or when you you amend the code to limit property uses. And so I think the question would be, would changing the slope to 20% regulation restrict property uses, or would it just alter where those uses could occur?
I believe it restricts it because of the density requirements. Isn't that correct? I see nods. Yes. I think it would be a Measure 56 notice.
And we did and I just want to, sorry to jump in. Measure 56 notice was done for all of these code amendments, but my guess is the change from the current slope to another slope was not in those original code amendments. Therefore, this would be a new Measure 56 notice.
Correct. We would be substantially changing what we noticed for. So we would need to give notice to those folks within the 20% slope or 15% or whatever you all decide.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, does not the now inclusion of the landslide criteria change things significantly? I mean, we could say you can build, as it is now, you can potentially build on a 35% slope if you take mitigation efforts extreme to allow building there. Can we allow building certainly allow as a slope decreases, the mitigation efforts need to decrease with it? And I'm questioning if we're going to trigger something, because even with the addition of the landslide criteria. Other than that, I'm curious if this staff has read the submission, which seemed to be very thoughtful by Ms. Christine Kaczynski, and has any response to those things that she brought up. So it's a very long series of questions by me. Sorry.
Staff has read that and has a response if you'd like me to respond.
Go ahead, Josh.
Those questions are similar to questions we received back before this whole code went to Planning Commission, and we responded to the constituent at that time. And so we have answered those questions. I don't know if you want to know what our specific responses was. I'd have to dig into that detail. I know Laura earlier sent me what our response was at the time, but those questions are not necessarily new. They're repeats of old questions.
I'm curious why Ms. Kaczynski says that we heard from no one in her letter.
Can you help me with that?
Can I help you with that?
I was asking Laura. Laura, could you help me? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so Ms. Kaczynski's comments are included in the comments for the legislative agenda items. So they've been in these packets in the past. And I think part of the problem is that the event that she's talking about with the geologic hazards webinar was back in October or something at the end of last month, and we just haven't had a lot happening since then. But from my understanding is that format was a webinar format where people could type in questions. So they answered the questions that they could during the meeting. And then after the meeting, there was a big list of written up responses, but that were then posted on the website. And from my understanding, the city reached back out to everyone who attended to tell them where that was so they could go read the responses on the website. But I could specifically say that the comments also then got entered into the record, and that there's specific comments both in the comment matrix and then responses in our staff report for the legislative application as well.
So Mike, I'm on unfamiliar ground here and I admit it, but her opening paragraph talks about the city, has Oregon City adopted statewide land use goal 7, and she feels it would be a good idea because it's designed to protect life and property from natural disasters. Did we answer that question for her?
There is discussion in the staff report, but essentially you don't adopt a land use goal, you adopt codes and policies to implement the land use goal, and we believe that we have done that.
Okay, you believe we have done that. Okay.
Well, and if anything, adding the detailed landslide inventories, which is what all cities in Oregon should be striving to do, would bolster their goal 7 compliance by adding more detailed information to strengthen the areas, and so that we could have more surety and confidence in our geologic hazard overlay areas and our geologic hazard areas. So the fact that our geologic hazard area, I'm not sure of is that area changing, or did the city already change that area when you discovered or when you received the new landslide mapping from Tommy? Maybe that would.
We are, I've actually spoken to our GIS department and we are current.
So I do have 2 remaining questions.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell.
What is the impact of adding the landslide criteria? Say we didn't change the percentage slope, but we added the landslide criteria. Would that prevent someone from building, or would it limit what they could build? What's the actual impact?
It would limit them to the 2 dwelling units if over a half an acre, 1 dwelling unit if less than a half acre.
Okay.
The disturbed area would be 4,000 square feet or 50% of the size of the lot, whichever is less.
Okay. And my final question is, I'm still trying to grasp the tree removal thing. So let me paint this picture for you. 600 lineal feet of land. The first 200 feet at the crest has a slope of 25 per 100. So it drops 50 feet. Then the next 200 feet is flat as a pancake. And the final 200 feet has the same slope as to the toe as a crest. It drops 25 per 100. When they do the calculation for tree removal, do they do it on 600 feet, or do they do it on the slope sections that are sloped at 25 per 100?
So if neither is the answer. Neither is the answer.
Is that like if a train's going this way and then it goes that way, which one gets there first?
Just stay
I love this quiz.
But in your example,
and what's the name of the conductor?
Yeah, in your example, Commissioner O'Donnell, the 200 feet is 25%, but then we have a 50-foot buffer on that. So it'd actually be 250 feet. Same on the other side, 250 feet. And so there'd only be 100 feet of that 600-foot area that would not be considered.
Okay, so the calculation on tree removal is on those slope sections then?
Yeah.
Plus
okay.
the buffer.
Plus the buffer. Yep, I get it. Finally, thanks.
Yeah. I love these math quizzes. All right.
Hey, if you can't draw it, you can't understand it. Ask any engineer.
I could almost see Josh writing it down on a piece of paper. Okay.
He was.
And then here's it. Yeah. Okay. Commissioner McGriff. Frank and I are probably the only ones that enjoyed that. Maybe Josh too. McGriff.
Oh, I enjoyed it for the amusement, but I didn't enjoy it for the calculation. So I want to get back to something Commissioner O'Donnell said. So with all due respect, Christine Kaczynski is not expecting to go through a staff report to find the answer to her question. So the question remains, did she get the answer to her questions? Digging through a staff report to find an answer to something that you're asking is not, in my mind, a way to respond to a constituent or a citizen. So I guess I'm just a little concerned that the answer that I got based on what staff just said is no, she did not get the answers to her questions, which is why she's saying nobody responded to her. I did attend that workshop as well and observed, because I'd worked with Dr. Burns before. So I think at the very least, and you know, I've been dealing with Christine my entire career here in Oregon City. So I understand the types of questions she asks, and I understand the types of time it's going to take to answer these questions. But I think, with all due respect, I think we should give her some answers or even references to where she can get these answers. I just, you know, I can see why she's saying she's heard from no one. If she's expected to go through a staff report, that's not giving her an answer. So whatever we can do to try to respond to her respectfully, I would just ask that we please do that. That it just kind of hurts my heart. So I want to get back to my concern. I understand your research, but I want to tell you that we had experts in the room at the city in Oregon City when we were reviewing the Newell Ridge apartments. The answer to the question was no, do not develop there. So we had the science at the time, however crude it was. But regardless of that information, things happened. So again, having experience in this and other areas, I am still asking for a reduction to 20%. And if we're adding these other things in, I think the Measure 56 requirement is minimal. I'm interested in helping the development community not take unnecessary risks. And I realize that's their issue, but if we can do everything we can to minimize developing in these areas, knowing what I know about Oregon City, I want to do it. I'm also concerned about the calculation that Commissioner O'Donnell just went through to determine a tree canopy. So if we had tree experts on our staff, I think I would feel more comfortable. And again, right in my own neighborhood, there is a site that has been completely wiped out of trees. It's on a slope. So how is that, you know, how does the tree canopy help us in that regard? There are other sites that I am aware of where, again, the complete site has been accidentally removed. All the vegetation has removed on it. And, you know, and like I said, you mentioned Waterboard Park. So I moved here in 1988. I was able to drive up that street until 1990. And I have an all-wheel drive vehicle. So, I mean, we're not developing there, but it's a natural park. But we have areas all over the community that are like that, including South End. I won't drive up South End Road anymore. And that's just me personally, because I know what it's doing. But in the county, you know, saying they're going to get around, they said that when I worked for the city, oh, we're going to get around to that in 2 or 3 years. So, you know, how many years has that been since I've lived here? They may get around to it. So you know, again, staff, I guess my expectation was I had some assurance that you were going to very strongly consider our requests, even though we didn't have the data to reduce that slope. I still think 25% is way too high. And I have many friends in the development community. So I'm very sensitive about what their concerns are. And I'm just not comfortable with 25%.
All right, so I guess my response is that I mean, from the staff's perspective, I feel like they're saying that they did the analysis and they reached out to professionals for input because we asked for the additional analysis. And at this point, their answer was that the 25% was sufficient as long as we added the additional data, which we are I'm frozen. Can you not hear me?
You're
You can hear me?
freezing up.
So, you know, they added the data, or we are adding the data. I feel like we're doing what the professionals are guiding us and telling us to do. So I'm not supportive of changing the slope. That's just my opinion. I'm not sure if there's general consensus of that on that. So we need to provide some direction to staff. I'm not sure if this item is ready to come back. If it's not ready to come back to us in June with resolution with what we have forward, we need to be clear about information that we would like from staff. I think I could support this. My opinion is I could support this, but I would like to get some more information about the tree canopy, and I would like to get some input from some professional, either Bill Burns, Scott Burns, someone regarding tree removal and percentages, because I still think that's an area of concern, an area where we could improve our code. Or we can confirm from others who are professionals in this arena that what we have in our code is okay. I'm just not fully convinced on the tree area. So that's my particular area where I would like a little more information. Josh, is your hand up to respond? Are you ready?
Yes, please. I just wanted to respond to the Ms. Kaczynski contact that I have an email in front of me where we did respond September 2nd, 2020. And then there was another response that occurred after that forum that was later in September. We have not responded to our current letter because we just received it today.
All right, thank you, Josh.
Forward that, so if I happen to speak with her or I run into her, I can say I have proof that you responded.
Sure. Commissioner O'Donnell.
So on the mayor's concern about essentially ground cover and tree removal, I agree on that component entirely. I'd like to see a little bit more elaboration on that. And what comes to mind is the Park Place, where they were talking about the amount of surface water runoff and also stability of soils. So I'm with you on that component of your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner McGriff. Do you have something new?
No, I was just going to try to make a motion just to get this off the dime.
Well, I'd like to give the other commissioners.
Yeah, I just don't want it to be, me against the staff. I'm not against the staff. I just have a slight disagreement.
Well, this is a work session, so we're not taking any motions. Commissioner Smith.
I'm still undecided on the percent. I understand both points on it, and I guess I feel a little surprised by the response back from our direction originally, but I understand it, and I still haven't made a decision on how I feel on that. So I guess I wouldn't mind. I haven't read Christine's letter that was here today, so I would like to read that. But I agree on the comments about the trees and getting the input back from staff a little bit more on that. I'm still weighing the percentage though.
Yeah, so maybe a presentation from Bill Burns or Scott Burns about the slopes and the differences, and kind of summarizing the science that you presented today of how having the landslide data would catch development on lower slopes, and maybe talk about the quality of the mapping or the inventory and what that adds to. So kind of just talking about the science of it, maybe hearing from one of the experts would probably be a good suggestion to help folks have some comfort in what number they should pick. I believe that the staff report, your information that you provided was based on information you received from others, and that's why you stuck with the 25%. So that's why maybe a presentation from Bill or Scott Burns might be a good suggestion. Commissioner Morrow, do you have anything?
I'll just say that I'm also undecided in that I'm interested in hearing about the trees, and I'm also interested in hearing how this would affect the Park Place master plan and how we would go about making those changes. So that's where I am right now.
Yes, I think you mean the Park Place concept plan.
Yes.
But yes, yeah, and I would be interested in knowing your tax lot numbers when you were doing the calculations of the slope. If you could, did you include the concept plan areas?
I would need to ask our GIS. I don't know the answer.
Okay. I believe that Park Place concept plan area would be an area that would have maybe a significant contribution to the number of parcels affected by the 20% versus the 25%. If you look at the GIS mapping on that. So that's why I was wondering. All right, so it sounds like there's general consensus that this is not ready to come back for a public hearing, and we probably need to have some further discussion on that. All right, so with that, I think we can wrap up this item. Josh, or John Lewis, do you need anything else from us?
I have clear direction.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a matter of scheduling it.
Right. Yeah, I know we're having lots of meetings, so good luck with that one. All right, so we can move on. It's 8:05. I do think this sidewalk one may take a few minutes to work through. Do we want to take a 5-minute break? I think we probably do. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 8:10. Yeah. All right, we're recessed for a break. All right. So it is 8:10. Looks like we have everybody, so I'm going to call our work session back to order. I think we are ready to get started on discussion item number 3. This is street trees and associated sidewalk damage in the Wasco Acres, Trailview, and Tracy Heights subdivisions. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Can everyone see that okay? All right. I'm sorry, what's that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we are here tonight in response to some concerns from some community members regarding lifting of sidewalks in specifically 3 neighborhoods in the Park Place Neighborhood Association area. And it related to trees that were planted. And so the request from the commission was for us to come back at a work session with more information about what happened and how options to move forward from here. So I'm going to start the presentation and just talk a little bit about the history, and then I'll end up passing it over to John Lewis to talk about the where do we go from here. So the first is generally, why do we plant street trees? So we know that they provide shade, which cool our stormwater, our houses. They provide comfort walking down the sidewalk in the sun or the rain, or for parking your cars. They consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. They're habitat for critters. They're beautiful. People love them in their neighborhood and believe that they help build neighborhood character. And they provide a barrier for safety for those walking on the sidewalk to feel a little bit more comfortable, or at least I know I do when I'm walking with my kids. So there's lots of reasons why trees would cause a sidewalk to lift up and create a lip, which we know is dangerous and causes tripping hazards and doesn't comply with ADA standards and all in lots of cases. But I'm just going to talk about a couple of big ones. The first one is if it's the wrong tree. And so over our history, we have created street tree lists so that we do have the right tree planted in the right spot. The next one is that spacing. It's important that we have a tree that will grow within our climate and that the planting area is appropriate for the tree to be planted. So over time, the city has created street tree lists, which again look at both of those species and spacing questions. The last one is if it's planted correctly or incorrectly. We want to make sure that the tree is able to survive being transplanted and planted so that it's alive. And then also through that, we have created standard planting details for how we want trees to be planted over time. And then we also require root barriers for installation of new trees in new subdivisions. But kind of similar to the last discussion, we're talking a little bit about how our codes and policies used to be and how they are today. And it's very, very different. Over time, we have amended our code quite a bit. In the 1980s, we generally started becoming more consistent for requiring street trees. Our code, at least in the PUD code, we had something that required just general percentage of landscaping, and that was as clear as it was. And I would say that's pretty common over land use. As time has marched on, we've written longer and longer codes with more clarity. But back when there wasn't a lot of clarity, which meant there was a lot of flexibility and that things got implemented differently. Since then, we've changed our code lots of times between 91 and 2009. We first started implementing a 4-foot minimum planter strip width in 1998, which happens to be the same year that we adopted their street tree list. And then from there, we've gone through a series of code amendments to make it even wider to 5 feet where it stands today. It's 5.5 feet with the curb. So in today's code, you'll see 5.5 with the curb, but the planter area itself still has remained at 5 since 2004. In 2013, we revised our street tree list. So the Natural Resources Committee took that on and worked quite a bit on that street tree revision. They removed some tree species that they felt weren't appropriate for the street tree list. Some of those examples include a Norway maple, which is an invasive tree, or the northern catalpa, probably said that wrong, which is a tree that had messy fruits or seed pods. Over time, we've seen that there were some trees that were planted that had either cherries or just different sort of plants that people, abutting property owners, were frustrated with because they would make their carpet dirty when they would sort of walk into the house. In 2013, we also added additional street trees. And since that time, in amending our code, even before that as well, we've expanded the tree list to recognize street tree lists for other jurisdictions around the area, and then also trees that are approved by certified arborists. So lots of change throughout the years for how we regulate trees, the extent to which we regulate trees. As you saw in the packet, we now have standards about where street trees go, what the spacings are, and over time we've added even more and more spacing standards from utility meters and things like that. So what happened with these three? Wasco Acres was a subdivision that was submitted in 1998. Happens to be the same year that we created the street tree list. The street tree list was in May. I have no idea what month the Wasco Acres subdivision was submitted, or so that means I don't know if it was technically subject to it, but good news is that it did comply with the 1998 street tree list. So there was 3 tree species in Wasco Acres. They were all on the 1998 list. Today, our list is different, and so only 2 of the 3 species are on our list for today. Trailview is the big one. Trailview certainly has the most damage, and the damage that is the furthest from being compliant. They had 2 of their 4 trees on the approved street tree list, and their approved street tree list was prepared by a landscape architect. So it's a little bit different with that particular one. The 2 on the street tree list were for larger planter areas, so there's a note there. So they still, according to the street tree list, they weren't appropriate for that size, but again, we have the approval from the landscape architect on that. Today, one of them is still on our street tree list, but again, it's for a larger planter strip. So if they were to come in today, it would be a different result. And Tracy Heights, they also complied with their street tree list at the time, which was 2002. So they were compliant with the 1998 list. And they had 2 tree species, both of which were on the list. And today, only one of those 2 species is on the list. I'm going to pass it over to John to talk about our current standards.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, City Commission. So before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge that I have, I've been on this neighborhood. I walked every stretch of the sidewalk, both sides of the street, and Pete Walter and I did that together a couple weeks ago. And, you know, I walk a lot of Oregon City sidewalks, and you know, this is a long-standing concern, challenge, problem, whatever you want to call it, in Oregon City. It's widespread. I know we're talking specifically about Wasco Acres, Trailview, and Tracy Heights, but later in the presentation, I think we need to get to kind of where do we go from here. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that we've, you know, our code when it comes to sidewalks and street trees and street design, it's pretty clear sections of code. Sidewalks, which have been development requirements for many years, are generally considered beneficial. to promote safety. We've got Oregon Municipal Code that states that the property owner will be contacted to make needed repairs when the sidewalk hazard exists. Chapter goes on to address liability, repair timelines, and enforcement. Trees, similarly, they provide lots of benefit. Laura went through most of that, so I won't cover that again. But a street tree is a community-owned tree that grows on city property, generally located within a planter strip between the sidewalk and the street, but that the abutting property owner is responsible for maintaining the trees. Most significant factors contributing to the longevity of a street tree include planting the right species in the right location, the right method, with the proper maintenance of the tree over time. And then our street design has also evolved. Again, striving to meet a variety of objectives: walkability, utilities, drainage, utility boxes, aesthetics, and a landscape buffer. So this picture is all these pictures from this point forward are from our walk, kind of a representative example. The other thing I'd say, there's a couple of streets in Trailview. I'm assuming each of you have been to the neighborhood and drove through it, but when this issue first came up, some of the trees in the Trailview neighborhood were in bloom at the time. It's just unfortunate. It's kind of like what you want for a tree canopy, and yet we've got these sidewalk issues. So I love the looks of the trees. I love the way that neighborhood feels as you walk under the canopy. It was the day we were there, it was warm. It was much cooler under the canopy than it was out from the canopy. So I definitely see the value in the trees. And so, as I talk through this, I don't want to come off as someone who's not in favor of trees, because I very much am. It's just in some of these locations, it's clear that that's a bit of a problem. Can you move to the next slide for me, Laura? So the city doesn't have a proactive sidewalk inspection program, and if we did, it would focus probably more on intersection and ADA ramps. Our sidewalk, as it pertains to raised sidewalks or sidewalks that maybe aren't as safe as we'd like them, that's a complaint-driven process where we take the complaint, we verify the complaint, and notify and work towards compliance with the property owners. Through the commission's encouragement, and some of you in particular have, we've adjusted standards such that we allow more sidewalk grinding. We don't see a lot of this, but we allow for alternative alignments and different materials if people want to propose those. We'd be happy to work through those, especially on pilot case. We don't see a lot of that, but that's an option. We definitely are extending compliance timelines, especially through COVID, but even before that, we once we start a case, we work with the property owner if they're moving in the right direction. There's really, we try not to have that feel of a heavy hand of enforcement, but yet still get compliance. Next slide, please. So these pictures again from the neighborhood. So what's happening in this specific neighborhood? Well, again, it's a beautiful neighborhood. There's some compliance already going on that has already happened based on folks' familiarity with the city's code. And I think that happened before our notice even happened. But in other areas, as we walk through it, what was interesting to me is lots of times we see, the roots pushing the sidewalks up and shifting the grade of the sidewalk. This neighborhood, in particular, Trailview, you saw a lot of those trees with roots that were at the surface level on the other side of the sidewalk, well up into the yard. And sometimes even when the yard was kind of uphill of the sidewalk and uphill of the planter strip. So, when I went out there, I was pretty certain there's got to be, a handful of these we could work with the property owner on and shift that sidewalk or trim sidewalks, back and, live with, maybe a short section of narrow sidewalk, do meandering sidewalks, look at those other kinds of options. And really we just, we don't have that in many places, most places in this neighborhood. Those tree roots have gotten they're under the sidewalk and they're moving well up into the yard. So that's unfortunate. The other thing that we see in a lot of neighborhoods, and I'm not condoning it at all, but I thought it was interesting. There was one street where the property owner had pretty much, and I'd have to assume this was ice damage and they're just kind of starting to deal with it, but they had pretty much topped the trees in their neighborhood. And, we see a lot of compliance without, necessarily pursuing the proper channels at the city. I think people are frustrated with the narrow planter strips and the streets, the trees that have been planted in them. And, rather than deal with the damaged sidewalk, they're likely cutting them down, or in this case, at least cutting the tops of them off. And I'm assuming they're going to cut them all the way down at some point in the future. But, so just a variety of things. The few people that we talked to in the neighborhood were understanding. Just some property owners have a lot more frontage than others. We talked to one property owner on the corner, and they really love their trees. They really recognize the problem, and yet recognize that there's really not many answers other than in most of these cases, especially in the Trailview neighborhood, there's not an option for both keeping the sidewalk and keeping the tree, and that's unfortunate. Oh, next slide for me. There you go. So in the next couple of slides, I'll share a few solutions that you may want to consider. But today I asked Chris Dunlop, our GIS coordinator, to query the city's subdivision history. So I can paint the liability picture in a little different way. My staff report, I indicated that there's 158 miles of sidewalk and over 2,600 curb ramps. My point there is that, we've got a lot of infrastructure in place out there. And, the concern I have is, a policy change that puts that liability on the city would be significant. We have some liability now, but not the kind of liability that I think would happen if it was to go citywide. So again, in accordance with longstanding city code, the responsibility for these assets currently resides with the abutting property owner. I also shared a little bit of value with you in the staff report, which is just trying to come to some number. I would say, depending on the project, the unit price for that is different, but somewhere around $700,000 for a mile of sidewalk is where I think we probably land. So just trying to put that in some kind of context. And then I thought with this information, it might paint the picture differently. While today we don't have sidewalk problems on every subdivision tax lot, if you assume each tax lot includes a street tree, you would have to recognize a fair amount of future liability that goes along with that. So we've done a lot of subdivisions over the years, and I can break these out even further if I wanted to, but I was trying to get to the timeframes that I noticed. Laura, you added some dates for that timeline for us, so thanks for that. But I didn't get that in my query, so I kind of stuck to the 98 to 2013 information, and then 2014 and beyond. Next slide. So what are other cities doing to reduce future conflict between sidewalk and street trees? Well, just reemphasize that this is a challenge And it's not unique to Oregon City. This is in other jurisdictions as well. Sidewalk hardscape has become an urban necessity, yet it also is rigid and it's resistant to tree roots and the tree growth, but it's not impenetrable. And because of that, the two sometimes are at odds. And that's what we're seeing in this neighborhood and many other neighborhoods. And with that, we can continue to implement the best practices and seek updated standards, root barriers, wider planter strips, more robust outreach on sidewalk and tree information. I think we all have thought a lot about these conflicts. I know I have. It's tricky to be an advocate for street trees and for safe walkable communities and still support the higher urban densities and also the standards that go along with affordable housing. So I'd like you to think about the double negative of forcing these planter strip trees to the point of failure, where you end up with what I call kind of a double negative, which is we're seeing in a lot of the neighborhoods where those trees are starting to push the sidewalks, those homeowners who are kind of on top of their game, they work towards removal of the tree. Sometimes they're late with that. So we still see a compromised sidewalk with grade changes along that sidewalk, 20, 25, 30 years after the tree growth. And so we end up not only losing, not only with a kind of a compromised sidewalk that, yeah, they can grind or they can patch or they can leave it as is. But so we end up with that, and we end up with a removed tree that had, been successful for 25 or 30 years. And that's where I see it being kind of a double negative. So what are other cities doing to manage existing sidewalk and street tree conflicts? Well, many cities do what we do. They continue to require the property owners to remove the tree and deal with the sidewalk and mitigate the tree so that they can maintain their tree canopy. I'm sorry, my phone just won't leave me alone. They are revising street tree standards and street standards. That's something we have done as well, and we will continue to work on. Again, waiving permit fees, we've done some of that, especially through the COVID period, and we can continue to do that. There is this expectation, though, that we still regulate that, and we still ensure the construction is done in the proper way. So we still have costs associated with that, but we can continue to make that that's a pretty easy concession. There are cities that have reimbursement programs. In the staff report, there's a write-up that really I think Laura's staff did, where they did some website searches on different programs for reimbursing property owners or sponsoring sidewalk and tree repair costs. So financing some of those repair costs is an option. The other thing that I think is an option, and it's not something that's necessarily listed on websites, but I think the idea of getting out early. So if we chose to do more sidewalk inspections and could get out in front of those, a lot of these you can see them coming a couple years in advance, where you could get out and actually kind of note when that sidewalk is just starting to show signs of pushing, and work with that property owner to remove and replace that tree earlier, or remove that tree from the planter strip and replace one on their yard side of the sidewalk, which I think would still doesn't guarantee that you won't have sidewalk damage, but it's a lot less likely to happen. This is that matrix that we included in your packet. So just kind of showing some these are a handful of folks that we were able to find in the state of Oregon that had something on the lines. So Beaverton, Fairview, Grants Pass, Newburgh. Looks like Portland is maybe looking at waivers. I think they try some pilot programs as well. And then Sherwood and Wilsonville, all different kinds of approaches to that, but similar kind of message, which is they're helping with the problem, helping pay and manage the problem. So I would also add that I know the city of Tualatin, they have a sidewalk utility that I believe is a component of their pavement maintenance utility fee. I didn't reach out to Tualatin recently, but that's my recollection of their program, is they have an element of their pavement maintenance fee that they contribute, they charge for, and they contribute to sidewalk maintenance. I guess I see benefits both ways. I just, I think it's going to be a significant change for the city to look to a program. I guess we would want to simplify that as much as we can, but I've got concerns, obviously, because of the time commitment and the effort that goes into that. And then of course the cost, whatever that might be, but I get it. So yeah, the last slide was about questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis. I don't see any hands yet, so I'll just say one comment about the table of the number of neighborhoods with the years. You have a pre-1998 one, and it seems to me in my mind that maybe that starting point should be maybe like 1980, where you started requiring trees. I'm not sure about neighborhoods before 1980, but if we're talking about the city's portion of liability, for lack of a better, their responsibility to contributing to the problem that we have in our city. It seems like when we started requiring street trees, whether or not we did it right, I know things change over time, but I feel like it seems like, and I just picked 1980 because I think you said in the 80s, Ms. Turway, that was when we started requiring trees, and therefore we became a contributing factor to things that may not go on perfectly. And, we're dealing with that in other areas. The Geologic Hazard Code was just an example of that, right? There were previous decisions that were made maybe 20 years ago that allowed development in areas that today we would have never, hopefully, we would not ever have approved that development. But it doesn't mean that we're not dealing with that decision today and trying to come up with ways to navigate that. So anyway, that's kind of was my thought on that table of maybe not including everything of pre-1998, but it seemed like there was a line where the city did have a hand in drawing that line, maybe in around 1980 seemed to be appropriate. Since I'm talking, I'll just go ahead and say what I think. I like the idea of like the 50%, or maybe the city coming up with a program to assist homeowners or property owners. I realize that has a budgetary piece to it, so maybe that will come up in our budget discussions in a few weeks. Something for us to consider, but I would certainly support that. And I'll just stop there. Commissioner McGriff.
Well, I think there's a great deal of irony going on here. And part of the issue is too, when we as a city approve a subdivision, there are a number, as I recall, a number of checks and balances. So somewhere in the process, the width of the planting strip didn't get looked at, nor did the species of tree, which sometimes they like to, let's just face it, oh, I can get these cheaper, I'm just going to get this one. So maybe that also wasn't looked at. So there's, as you say, Mayor Lyle Smith, there's some culpability all the way around, which is why I definitely advocate for staff getting out in the field. Besides, it's refreshing, gives you a break, go out and check stuff out, take your little tape measure. Is there an option, John, to, with the narrower parking strips, us maybe purchasing some trees in bulk to replace them, trees that would fit in a parking strip? Knowing trees like to go where water is, if there's no root barrier, they're going to go for the closest water, which is why they're going across under the sidewalk to people's lawns. And Tony helped me with a situation where a tree did break through a root barrier in my property, but that's because I have hard pan in the street because they dumped all the residue from digging out Washington Street into the parking strip. So I have no real soil. So my tree root went towards my stone wall, and I was able to work with the city to cut the root, repair the sidewalk, and put in a smaller tree, not in diameter, but smaller species of tree with a root barrier. But it was going for the water. I mean, that's what they do. So is that something that's an option that we can consider? And you don't have to answer right this minute, but that's a couple of things on my mind would be, I know everybody in the world is looking for trees right now, so I know there's not a lot of availability, but we could put in an order for future to get a batch of them, because the more you buy, the cheaper they are, and help in that way. I like the idea of option number one. I think that what we can do to help is going to minimize it, because yes, it is beautiful. The neighborhoods that have mature trees, they definitely have an advantage in terms of their sellability and everything that you talked about in terms of providing shade for the asphalt. It's they're taking carbon out of the air. And so the companion piece to this is that we should not be so quick to be allowing people to cut down trees, because this is just the other side of it. So we've got to balance both sides of this in terms of whether we're going to be asking people to replant trees. So we should be more judicious about not allowing for removal of large mature trees that aren't really doing anything other than doing what they do. And we've been through this, which is why I advocated for trees in the public right of way to be included in the permit process. So those are my comments. I agree with Rachel in terms of us having some culpability for this. And I understand it may be a budgetary adjustment, but I think we have an obligation to try to help right this wrong.
All right, thank you, Commissioner McGriff. And if you're wondering, just for reference, what she meant by option one in the staff report, just a reminder, there were 3 options presented to the City Commission in the staff report. The first one was to direct staff to provide the City Commission the specific recommendation for a sidewalk assistance program that largely aligns with the existing design standards and the concept of an annual assistance budget and an individual property owner sidewalk replacement grant program. 2 was to continue the matter to a future work session to discuss more stuff, street standards and different sidewalk assistance model. And then option 3 was maintain the status quo. And that's it. So I just wanted to let everybody know what options. Commissioner McGriff mentioned option 1, which was similar. Mine was a very brief, but it was essentially a support of option 1. But Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, the first thing is I almost feel like each of us has to issue a disclaimer that we don't hate trees. We don't like what they do when they're placed in the parkway, but we don't hate trees. We understand the benefits of trees. The trees in the parkway are problematical. I mean, it's a living creature that's in search of water. It can't find it under an impermeable roadway. It can't find it under a sidewalk. It's going to go to where you water your lawn. And so what happens? So I think what we're faced with tonight are 2 components: the present situation and how to resolve it, and avoiding a recurrence of the situation in the future by taking some measures to. We can't do what we've always done and expect a different result. So philosophically, I believe that if someone including a political entity, has done harm to another, and it's not of the others, the other had no participation in it, that they bear a responsibility in it to make it right. So I do feel the city should participate in fixing this situation, no question about it. I want to compliment Ms. Turway. She provided a chart that showed the year of the subdivisions and the year of the tree rulings, and it was interesting that some of those trees have been removed, and for who knows what reason, not only because they're dirty, maybe they were problematic because of their root structure, because of the way they search for water. But we don't have to get into those details. I think, you see where trees have been removed, trees have been refined. I do think we have to remember that this is a citywide problem. These 3 subdivisions cited are just examples. And what we're dealing with is symptoms of the problem, not the problem itself. And I've never heard the term seeking out the root cause more properly used, because this is a root cause situation. So I feel, the things we talk about, the grinding, that's a temporary solution, I imagine, unless you do something to prevent the root from increasing its diameter and continuing to lift. The root barriers apparently can be overcome. I know that my subdivision was built in 94, I believe. And I can tell you, there's not a 4-foot planter strip. It's like 36 inches or something like that. I don't see many 5s. I mean, we have a city code thing to look at that I think in terms of the long-term situation is what do we want? I mean, I saw Mr. Lewis cited the number of tax lots, and thank God not every tax lot has a tree on it. They might be one every 3 or one every, who knows how many there are. I mean, it's a number of trees that count. I kind of think, and some of them are even situated near water mains, which where they were put where they shouldn't be. So I guess long story short, in the end, I believe in this mitigation assistance, maybe up to $1,500 per tree. And I don't want to say per home, because some homes have more than trees. If we're going to require a new tree to be placed, we got to rethink if we're going to put it in the parkway. I mean, maybe a tree needs to go in the front yard, and even that's going to be a discussion, because now this parkway thing is a weird situation. It's city property that you have limited use of, but are responsible for taking care of, which is it's just a weird situation. I don't know if we need to require a new tree being placed, and that's a discussion that we need to have. And if so, where? If we simply put a tree back in the parkway, do we just revisit the problem in 20 years? Do we need to change the code? And, I've been in subdivisions where the sidewalks go right all the way to the curb and the trees are in the front yard. And again, I don't take me for someone that hates trees. I love them. I love being out in the far. I love being among trees, but I don't like what they do when you incur a $2,000 to $5,000 debt because of what they've done to your property. And, even trees that aren't lifting sidewalks. I mean, these narrow parkways, they're just not the right place for this living organism to be. Now, we want to chance it and continue the practice. We'll be ready to continue the fix. If we want to come up with an alternative, that's a longer term solution. So again, I'll say that we have an immediate problem. And I think that I think our solution is participate up to $1,500 per repair and waive the fees on the tree permits, and have a discussion as to what we want to do in terms of replacement trees, how and where. And I guess that's a lengthy discussion, but I wanted to put it out there because I've given it a lot of thought. I mean, I've walked my own neighborhood. And when you look at the ADA thing that talks about a mismatch, I think as small as a 1/4 inch between adjacent panels of concrete, that's a pretty staunch, pretty tough criteria. Anyhow, I'll leave you with all those thoughts, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you with that presentation. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Smith. You're muted.
All right. I struggled with the presentation a little bit tonight because yes, it is a citywide problem. However, not all the citywide problems are the citywide street sidewalk problems are happening because of the same reason. I have sat through this same meeting multiple times since I've been on the commission, the same exact meeting. And I also know that some of the trees were removed from those lists specifically because they were pulling up sidewalks, not because they were dropping seeds, not because they were invasive, because they were screwed up. We put the wrong trees in, or we kind of, had the wrong trees on the list. So to kind of, kind of ignore that when we all know it's true. And we're just now still having the same conversation. I think it's really frustrating. And the idea that that we have an option to continue this meeting or to maintain the status quo, which is what we've been doing for the last 2 decades, is ridiculous that that's even an option. We have to fix it, and we have to fix it, and it's going to cost to fix it. And so but that's really the only option. There was so many frustrating meetings over the years and with trees. And one that comes to mind, this idea that, well, we'll just move the sidewalks. Now, if anyone has ever taken a nice stroll in front of the Ermatinger house and wondered why that whole entire half of the block in front of the Stevens Crawford house has sidewalks that are 10 feet from the road, and the other half of the block is right on the road, was because there were 2 giant trees in front of the Stevens Crawford house that were pulling up the sidewalks. And so with a huge amount of money, and actually I think grant money from the city, we redid the sidewalks 10 feet away from the street. And guess what? In doing so, digging them up and cutting the roots of the trees, killing the trees anyway. And so now the trees are gone and the sidewalk meanders way off the street, and that's still the way it is today. This is happening all over the place. And, we can't keep doing that. It's ridiculous. So we have to fix it. We have to acknowledge the fact that we made some screw ups and fix it, and not just kind of wash over that and say, well, it's a citywide problem. And, we've updated the tree list because there were dropping seeds and stuff. No, we updated the tree list because we put the wrong trees in. Let's fix it.
Okay. Mr. Lewis.
So I agree with a lot of things that I've heard tonight. This idea of going forward and then trying to contribute to the fixes, going back. That's the one that I struggle with, because again, we work with the moving forward is the one I'm most interested in, because I think we're going to have to come back to that one for sure, because I think it does impact, how we build these planter strips, and the root barriers and the width is a delay. It may be a 10-year delay from what we're having today, or it may be 15-year delay, but it's a delay. Just because in many places, Oregon City soils are hard. They're rock hard. They're almost as hard as some of the sidewalks. So they won't go down into the soil. They're picking that space between the sidewalk and the soil to grow. And, we've got some issues in Oregon City that maybe some jurisdictions don't have, but I'm just saying that's kind of a future topic for sure. What I heard from going back to the solutions is city contribution of some amount per damage or per tree, and how that formulates based on, is it a tree cost? Is it a root grind situation? Is it a fixing the sidewalk piece? You're not too prescriptive about. You think that $1,500 amount per incident is about what you're thinking. So we can bring back more information on that, or a proposal for that. But again, and I'm a little confused about, we can't change, Rocky, you're right. I wasn't suggesting moving the trees. I know that was what my point with some of the existing roots is that they're clearly there's not an option for moving that sidewalk. So then it's back to, are we really wanting to put trees back into these narrow planter strips? And that's the one that really has me concerned, because that, again, well, for one, I think even the property owners recognize that as problematic. So we're going to work with them to fix it, but we're going to force them to put in a tree into that existing planter strip. I just think that's got problems associated with it. So I guess I'm looking for a little direction on what to do with the plant reestablishment.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't know that there's general consensus on the $1,500 per tree or whatever. I believe that I think we're getting that number from the table that Laura presented to us, that other cities were proposing that. I'm open, I'll speak for myself at this point, I'm open to a recommendation from staff on what would that program, that sidewalk assistance program, look like from the staff perspective. If you were to implement something, I would also be supportive of a loan program versus a grant program, but I would like for city staff to think about what are our resources, what do you think is your recommendation? I think what you presented to us was what other cities are doing, and there was multiple options there. Some of them had loan programs, some of them didn't. Some of them were up to $1,500. I don't know if those other cities offer the grinding, offer the, is there a site evaluation first? I believe one of the cities said that a property only could request money no more than once per year. Clearly there would probably need to be out on the program, only spend so much money each biennium or each year. So she's saying I'm frozen. So that's where I'm at on the program of that option number one, I think, was for staff to come back with a recommendation. As far as going forward, I think that's a good question. Should we be requiring trees or leaving it optional? I think in general, most people like trees and they support having trees in an urban canopy, and we want to support that for all the good things that trees bring, right? But I agree. I think Commissioner O'Donnell said that, are we just creating problems even now for 10 years down the road, that we're just perpetuating all the subdivisions that were built in 2015? They're going to be back in 2030 wanting, needing sidewalk assistance because, we put plants in the planter strips. So I'm not sure on that. It seems like your presentation said that most cities, or maybe I missed it, do most cities require trees at this point, or are there cities that have that optional? What are they doing? We've talked about the programs, we've talked about most cities have this issue, but what are other cities doing as far as, are they still requiring trees in the planter strips? Or are we the only ones blazing the trail of considering removing that as a requirement because it's causing us problems?
Yeah, Laura may know more. I suspect that there's a mix. I think some have them and some don't, but I haven't checked.
It is pretty common. I would suspect almost all of them require them, unless maybe it's a small town or something like that of our size. We're pretty typical. Everyone's sort of doing exactly what we're doing, but we'll take a look and see.
Okay, Commissioner McGriff.
I was going to go ahead and wait until see whether Commissioner Marl had any comments before I responded.
I'll just say that I don't have much to add. I would agree with number one, option number one. I would also be wary of, again, communicating consensus on the 1500. So that's why I'm interested in hearing more of those options, whether it would be up to a certain point, and if we would do limited based on just one tree per property. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, and I should say, I don't know about the $1,500. I don't know how much it costs to grind a sidewalk versus repairing the sidewalk. So I don't know if 1,500 is the right number. I'm going off of the chart that Laura provided, where multiple cities had $1,500. So, Commissioner McGriff.
I'm not ready to jump on the Frank O'Donnell $1,500 bandwagon just yet. So I'm going to hold on that because I don't know that. I guess what I want to bring up, and obviously I'm not shy about trees, the value that a neighborhood has with trees and the value of one that doesn't have any trees is quite significant. I think any residential realtor will tell you that. It also, it's about curb appeal. And I think that I would like to see what species, even if it's one per property, that might work in a parking strip in these neighborhoods that would be reasonable, not drop fruit, not do anything, but just a street tree. Because I think that it does add value. And I think to just wholesale take out all the trees and have nothing there is not going to be beneficial. I mean, we're talking about developing an action plan. Well, that is one simple way that we can help minimize that. And as somebody pointed out last time, our neighbor to the north just got an award. I don't see us getting any awards for doing anything with trees. So I think that is an option that we need to look at. And I know that John is queasy about it, but John's going to go ahead and try to find the answer to the question. I think we can get you some remedies to make you feel unqueasy, but I think the trees are important. Trees add value. Trees do so many things. And I mean, I've heard it all. Oh, I don't want leaves dropping, or I don't want this dropping, or, we're only here on this planet for a very short time. Trees are going to outlast us. And I think that we have an obligation as a community to help minimize climate change. We have an opportunity to minimize any negative impacts. And just to, I just think the heat in that neighborhood is just going to rise up. But the other thing is we've got people in these neighborhoods who are coming out of COVID. I don't know how their employment has been affected. And I want to make sure that we are giving people a very long period of time to work with us to remedy this, that we're not asking for anything immediate, because I'm very sensitive to people's economic situation right now. I don't take that lightly. And I want the community to understand that we are concerned about that as well. So that's it.
All right, Ms. Turway, is that a new hand or?
It is. Just wanted to clarify a couple things real quick. One is I breezed over it a little high level, but the Natural Resource Committee is working on looking at the street tree list right now. So they had started it earlier this year, and their focus was to look at climate action to make sure that all the trees were appropriate for long-term health. So looking at that list again. And so the product of that would have been a new resolution of the City Commission with a new street tree list. So it's good timing for them, and to make sure that they're re-looking at every species on this list as well for its appropriateness. So it's already started. We'll make sure that they take a look at this issue. So I'm happy to report that. And then if I wanted to make it clear that if someone wants to remove a street tree, our code as it stands does not allow us to say no. Our code allows us to tell them how many trees are required for mitigation. And so if we want to either change whatever those street tree code standards are, or our development standards, just that there's clearly, I'm going to come in with a process. There's a process for it, and we should go through the process for that. And then I just wanted to clarify as well, I did mention that root barriers are required for all new replantings. That's new installations through development. So if you do a subdivision or commercial, when you have a tree that you remove and you do a replacement, root barriers are not required in those cases. So I want to make sure that was crystal clear. That's all.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, I would once again restate that I break the problem down into two components: the immediate problem, the present situation and how to resolve it, and a long-term problem. And for the immediate problem, I propose mitigation assistance, waiver of permit fees, and initially do not require a new tree to be placed until such time as we make a disposition on how we can do this and not create an ongoing problem. Maybe there's a code change in the future where every third house in the subdivision has a tree in their front yard, or X number of houses per subdivision have to have trees in the front yard. But I want to get back to the immediate problem. You got people out there with raised sidewalks. We have trip hazards. I think we can give direction. I don't care if it's $1,500 or what the amount is. That seems to be the going suggestion by other municipalities. But I believe in the mitigation assistance and waiver of the fee, and no initial direction on replacement of the tree. That can be a longer term discussion. Thanks.
All right, so I think
have a question.
Well, hang on. I think the general issue though is that for me is that we're talking about 3 specific subdivisions because someone in their neighborhood complained or something like that. But I feel like this problem is widespread. So I don't feel like I can just say, well, these 3 neighborhoods are the only ones that are getting assistance or permit fee waiver. So I think it needs to be broader. And I see Commissioner O'Donnell giving the thumbs up.
Yeah.
I think we were thinking global new program, not just a one and done here.
Right. And obviously this has a budget implication.
Yeah, I think, when we were thinking about this, really, maybe some tree mitigation funding, but we use quite a bit of that for Friends of Trees, general fund, or as John was alluding to earlier, we do have a pavement maintenance utility fee. You'd have to amend that to allow it for something like this. So, I'm not asking for guidance tonight. It's just, at the end of the day, there's only a couple of pots of money available. So we would come back with those as options, but I just wanted to kind of, for lack of a better term, plant the seed of what that might be coming from. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
It's in my root cause analysis.
No, I
All
did.
right. It's been a full night.
Tony, just keep it up, Tony. Just keep it. Oh.
All right. Well, at least we get some laughs somewhere in there. All right, Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, my question is that I appreciate the fact that the Natural Resources Committee is going to come up with a list. I am not interested in waiting. I want to know, are there 2 or 3 species of trees that could be planted in a narrow parking strip? I could look that up myself. I don't want to wait for them. I just would like to know the answer to that question. Because obviously there are some. They do exist.
Okay. And I feel like I should publicly say, because I asked the question, are we the only ones blazing the path of considering not requiring trees, that somebody's going to take that and quote me and say that I'm not supportive of trees and I want all the trees cut down. So I know how this works. I've been in politics for two and a half years. And somebody's going to take that and say she doesn't support trees. So let me just say that's not at all true. I think there's a different, we're talking about the future and going forward. I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell. There's 2 pieces. There's the now, and then there's this discussion about the tree list, climate change, our urban canopy, heat islands, all of that. I think we want our tree canopy. The question though is whether it's required or whether it's optional, and we provide guidance on how to do it in a really good way. And because I think most people like trees and most people think that they're beneficial and would want to plant them. When I bought my piece of property, there were no street trees there. The previous owner removed them. And I went out, I was like, no, it looks crazy. We need street trees. And I used Friends of Trees and put street trees there. So I optionally, and I can't believe that I would be alone in that I like street trees. I agree for all the benefits that they provide. I think they're pretty and I like them. But I want the list though, like Commissioner McGriff said, our role is at a minimum is to make sure our list of trees is good. And I know that the staff's been working on that, and we've improved it over the years by changing it and improving it. So I think we can get there. But this requirement versus optional though talks about that city culpability though, and going forward. So I guess it's a question of, do you think people would optionally put trees in, or do you think it needs to be a requirement? We're not going to solve that tonight, but
I think you would end up with developers saving the money, and then it would be left to the homeowners to come in on a patchwork, kind of like
Yeah.
you know, where you kind of moved in and you're like, I'd really like a tree there. The developer's not going to pay for it probably.
yeah, you're probably right. All right.
One thing too, I'd like
Wait.
to just maybe ask Laura, you know, I know that the Natural Resource Committee is looking at, you know, the street tree list. I don't know if there could be something that we could also ask them, you know, are there planting techniques relative to our standard that we should be looking at, right? I mean, are there bigger root barriers? Are there better soil? So, I mean, I can remember back in the day, you know, some of the root planting, you know, it probably wasn't the best soil, right? Or you had construction debris falling back into the planter strip hole. You know, are there other things? You know, I know one big one is how well you water them at the beginning, right? I mean, you know, now all of a sudden you're seeing a lot more of these water bags on the new trees to try and drive that water and those roots down, rather than just putting the tree and walking away in August and it's so dry. So, I mean, maybe there's a best practices that we could look at relative to what our standard design is, as part of this conversation.
Okay, Commissioner McGriff, last words on this topic?
Not last words. I just wanted to concur with your statement that I also had no street trees in front of my house when I moved in, and I did the same thing. I planted trees with root barriers, and you know, I'm not asking anybody in our community to do anything that I haven't done myself. So I mean, I know I would have preferred that we hired somebody to do it, but no, we dug our own holes and we had to add soil. It's, you know, it's something I think that even though the storm beat the crap out of my trees, I'm still going to have them trimmed and still try to make them survive, because I think it's important. It just improves the whole look of the community. So that was it. So I'll join my fellow commissioners, and we'll hopefully tackle this another day. But again, I'm going to continue to advocate for us adding street trees as part of the public right of way, like I asked for some months ago, because I've too many examples of where that has not worked. And if we'd had a permit, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to keep hammering on it.
All right, so I think I'll look to staff. I think you have probably everything you need on this item, and then some probably.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we can move on from this. We're probably all tired and ready to move on. City manager's report. Do you have anything for us tonight?
Not tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.